Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. We'll call the meeting to order. Just a very quick reflection and a welcome to all of those here in chamber and those at home. This is the third night in a row that we're here, we're meeting. I just did a quick tally, somewhere in the range of about 600 to 700 pages of meeting materials supported by our senior team, many of whom are back in the room with us again for the third night in a row, and we're getting stuff done, as they say here at the city. So I'm just a note of gratitude, if you will, for all of the work behind the scenes that has us prepared to have these great discussions tonight. I would like, if there's no objections, Council, to move the items 1.4 up to the top of the agenda, just so we can have those presentations and not... Okay, thank you. I'll call a quick vote then. All those in favor? I'd be contrary-minded. Okay, thank you. So, Common Clerk, first item then. There you go.
Your Worship, item 1.4 on the agenda, federal funding for climate change. 1.4.1 is low carbon economy fund agreement.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner or Finance Committee Chair, sorry, Councillor Merrithew, are you giving any introduction, or is the Commissioner?
Not this one, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well then we'll just invite Mr. Yuman to the podium and... Welcome, and welcome back. Second night in a row.
Thank you. You want me to make the presentation again?
Yes, if you're,
Okay.
well, or we'll give you the choice, sir. We could move you back to the bottom of the
Oh,
agenda,
no,
and you
I'll
can
do
stay
it,
for the
I'll
rest of the night. Yeah. I thought we were on the same page, but yeah.
Just ramp the enthusiasm up.
Yeah, we didn't want any of your enthusiasm, Samir, to wane off, so we've got you first up.
No problem. Okay, yeah, no problem. For those who were here yesterday, please bear with me. Thank you very much, Your Worship, Council. So I'm very happy to make this presentation to the Council on this. It's a good funding, good story here. Before I go further with the application, or before I go further with the project, I would like to give you some general description about the Low Carbon Economy Fund, which was launched in 2018 by the federal government as part of their carbon reduction, and also to meet the Paris Agreement to reduce their greenhouse gases across Canada 30% below 2005 level by 2030. So the program is everybody allowed to apply for the project. It's around $500 million. The completion date for this is March 31st, 2022. That means all the project must be completed, substantially completed by March 31st, 2022. 40% of the eligible costs, they provide 40% of the eligible costs for the municipal government. In 2018, September 2018, the City of Saint John has submitted application for two projects under the Low Carbon Economy Fund. We have received a notification in June 2019 that we approve in principle for this Low Carbon Economy Fund. Since then, we've been working closely with the federal government to iron out some of the detail in order to bring this for you this evening. As I indicated before here, we applied for two projects. The first project we call is the Municipal Building Deep Energy Retrofit Project. I don't want to go too much into detail on this project. I don't want to go into technical. I just want to give you a description about this project. Basically, what we're trying to do on this project, we want to try to implement energy efficiency conservation measure on over 30 municipal and water facilities. And this measure will include vary from light retrofit building envelope, putting a new window, upgrading our HVAC system, our control system, looking at renewable energy sources, training, all this here. And this is the main scope of the project. We are currently completing our energy study on this project, try to develop a, what do you call it, a implementation plan or energy plan, so in order for us to start the implementation. We have received $2.1 million grant from the Low Carbon Economy Fund toward the implementation of this measure under the Municipal Building Deep Energy Retrofit. We expect to, and also there's a possibility that we're going to receive $200,000 grant from the NB Power Energy Efficiency Program toward this energy measure. The benefit, the highlight of this is we will be able to reduce our energy and operating costs by over $400,000 annually. And as well, we are hoping to reduce our infrastructure deficit by $4 million, meaning that some of these assets, which they need to replace anyway, whether we get the funding or not, they're going to be replaced, whether we are replacing HVAC system at the Rossi Avenue Municipal Operation or replacing window at the Canada Game Aquatic Center and putting a new boiler. This has to be done anyway. So this will help us to reduce our capital expenditure. So this money comes as a good time when we are dealing with our asset management priority and risk management. And also, as well, we're going to be able to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 1,500 CO2 tons, or 6.5% of the total city corporate. Also would help us to meet our greenhouse gas target, which the council has approved in May 6th under the Climate Change Action Plan to reduce our greenhouse gas by 30% for the corporate. The challenge for us, as indicated previously, is the date. To meet the date is March 31st, 2022, and this is a challenge for us on this project, but we're going to work hard to meet this deadline. The second project here is the district energy system. Originally, when we did this project, we were under the impression there's going to be a Coast Guard development going on at the city, at the Coast Guard location. So we're thinking about a new development. So originally, the first phase of this project is to use geothermal or using the harbor as an energy source to be able to heat and cool 7 buildings, which includes some of the new construction going on there. Since then, because of the project was delayed on the Coast Guard, we have to scope down our project, and we went what we call it Project Phase 1. Currently, we are looking at connecting 4 buildings to the district energy system. However, we're not connecting to the harbor for Phase 1 on this project. And the 4 buildings are the Canada Game Aquatic Center building, Market Square, Hilton Hotel, and Genesis building. The federal government are very enthusiastic about this project, and there's a possibility in next year in 2020 that the government, if we wish, they could extend it to 2024, which allow us to add more building, and they give us additional fund if we need to extend our district energy system to include any new development on any other building here, if the city or council wishes to proceed with this. So this is a possibility we should know by January or February 2020. However, the main scope of this project, we're looking to upgrade our heating and cooling plant at the Market Square. As you know, our heating and cooling plant is not functioning properly, so we're going to take advantage of this money to help us reduce our capital and to upgrade our new asset at the Market Square also. So we're looking at that here. We are receiving $1.9 million grant from the Low Carbon Economy Fund towards the district energy system. We are looking at an additional $100,000 grant from NB Power Energy Efficiency Program. And we hope to reduce our infrastructure deficit by $3 million. Again, I indicated before here, this has come at a good time here when we need the money also to upgrade our asset at the Market Square, which needed very much, which are already aged asset, and they need to be replaced anyway. So also, additionally, we are looking at reducing our greenhouse gas emission by over 1,000 CO2 tons. And again, the completion date for this project, 31 March 2022. This project is already underway here, and we are doing a lot of progress on this project so far. However, the district energy system would allow us to capitalize on it. As indicated before, we can add more and more building, and can we expand it in the future, maybe over the next 5 years, to try to look at different energy sources such as heat recovery from Irving pulp and paper, which is a good story benefit here. Again, these 2 projects are aligned very well with what we're doing in terms of our asset management plan, and again was aligned with the climate change action plan to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 30%. And also with council priority to continue find way to reduce our energy operating costs and at the same time renew our assets. In the end, our recommendation by staff here is to enter into agreement with the Environment and Climate Change Canada under the Low Carbon Economy Fund for the district energy system and municipal building deep energy retrofit projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yamin, and we'll go to a few questions. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Mayor, you were talking so fast and so excited, I can't get all the four
Okay,
buildings.
sorry
It's
about
your
that.
Aquatic Center, Market Square Building. Who else?
Maxwell, Canada Game Aquatic Center, Genesis, and Hilton.
Oh, okay. So they have to be buildings that are owned by the city?
No, not really. No, the Market Square, the asset at the Market Square are owned by the city of St. John. However, currently, we have the Hilton and Genesis are already connected to the Market Square. However, we are upgrading the system to get more energy. The only one who is not connected, which is owned by the city, is the Canada Game Aquatic Center and will be connected to the district energy system.
So you wouldn't, because City Hall is connected, that wouldn't be included?
No, not for phase one.
Okay.
Not phase one. Could be a future phases.
And in future phases, I guess, like, can you include other buildings that are owned by the city, like, or do they have to be all grouped together? Like,
Well, I mean-
can you include Rossi Avenue, or is that too far away?
No, this is too far away. Like in our case, we have to look in the end as to be environmentally viable, as also we need to look at it, is it financially viable? And that's why when we originally, we couldn't connect other buildings, that's why we didn't use geothermal, because we didn't find it financially viable. However, in phase two, the next phase, if we see some development going on at the Coast Guard building, we hope, and could be our first one to connect this building to the district energy system, because when you have a new building, there's more opportunities there, more saving, and there's more capital saving for the landlord on this project here. So there's benefit.
Would the police station ever come into this, or are they already?
The police station, I do recall when we did it, is already, we had to make the provision to the police station, and I believe the court building to be connected to the district energy system in the future. So there's a provision to do that here, but this will be done at the later phases of the project.
I see, okay. Well, it's a great project. I'm sure you had a lot to do with the application, so thank you very
No,
much.
staff was involved very much. Neil was helping me very much on this project.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Could I have someone move the
I'll
recommendation?
move the recommendation.
Second by Councillor Hickey, just to have it on the floor. Thank you.
And that's for both of them? Or we
Yeah,
do
It's
separate?
one recommendation? It's one recommendation, yep. Thank you.
Well, there are two reports, each with a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, excuse me, sorry, I was
So we're
confused.
doing this one, which is the last one.
So the
first.
first one I have is the Low Carbon Economy Fund
Yeah.
recommendation?
I'll
Okay.
move that.
4.1.
I'll
perfect.
move that.
Okay, perfect, that's been moved. We'll just consider that on the floor. Thank you, Deputy. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I like the sounds of all of the grant money that we're getting. What's it going to cost us?
Excuse me. For the municipal building deep energy retrofit, we're looking at $5 million, 40%. However, even though we have the funding available, we have to look at case by case. We still have to do our cost analysis for each of the energy measure to make sure they are viable, to make sure they are financially viable.
Okay, so we know how much we're possibly entitled to get from the different levels of government.
$2.1 million.
$2.1 million.
Up to maximum $2.1 million.
Okay, and that's 40% of the project,
That's 40% of the.
and then we pay 60%.
Hey, we'll have the Commissioner of Finance just jump in for a second
Yeah,
here,
okay.
if I could, please, folks. Commissioner?
Yes, through your worship. I guess part of the benefit of transitioning a culture change into long-term planning is these agreements come after much due diligence and review, far before it gets to this stage. So these projects have already been incorporated into the capital budgets and to our long-term capital investment plans. Prior to going through an application process, these were approved, the applications were approved by the Finance Committee and Council. And they meet all the criteria of our capital budget policy with respect to prioritizing our capital plan. So we feel that this is going to not only be good value for money for the city, but also be very instrumental towards our infrastructure deficits, as well as given a possible revenue generation and cost reduction opportunities for the city.
Okay, so these projects were planned and approved, and then you went after the money to support them. Okay, excellent, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor McKenzie kind of stole a bit of my question there, but really that's okay. It was well answered.
Councillor McKenzie, give it back, please.
Yeah. No, but thank you very much, Samir and team, for this. I mean, I'm really excited about this. It's always great to see initiative like this taken, and I really hope that this can become, you know, as the Commissioner of Finance mentioned, as we move into the long-term planning mindset around things, that this can continue to become a big focus in development and acquiring these funds, especially as I think we're nearing the anniversary of the fourth anniversary of signing the Paris Climate Agreement. So great news. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And, okay, so we have the first motion on the table in terms of the sort of two presentations that were made. So I'll call the question on the first motion, please. All those in favor? Aye. Anybody contrary-minded? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you. And then we need the second recommendation. You'll move that. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Merrithew. Thank you. And I think we forgot to say, Councillor Merrithew, that these did come through the Finance Committee last night and were recommended to Council. Okay, I don't see anyone wishing to speak on these, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Just summary, a couple of very quick summary comments. Mr. Yumin, thank you. Thank you to the federal government for the Low Carbon Economy Fund. This is, you know, with 40% eligible costs being funded, this is very important funding for municipalities like the City of St. John. I'm really pleased this council has shown tremendous leadership, not just declaring climate emergencies or crises, whatever word you want to use, but also putting a lot of meat around that, obviously with yours and other people's work, Mr. Yamin, around our climate action, mitigation, adaptation plans, that these types of projects are real action to show progress there, that we will, music to my ears as well on climate action, but fiscally we'll save $675,000 in operating costs and offset $7 million in deficit. We'll reduce 2,565 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And I would say if there was an Oscar available for energy efficiency and environmental stewardship and just pure darn excitement, you'd get it. So thank you to you. Thank you to our Deputy City Manager and anybody else that touched these projects. They make a big difference. So thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Council. Next item, Common Clerk. I keep turning your microphone off. There you go.
Your Worship, item 1.1 on the agenda is the Budget 2020.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'll check in. You'll introduce. Okay, thank you. And if you just hit your button for me. There you go, to our councillor and Finance Committee Chairperson, Councillor Merrithew.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. So what we see in front of us is your 2020 General Fund Operating Budget. So Finance Committee saw this a couple of times, the last time last night, and they will recommend to Council, bring it forth to Council for Council to receive and file. Council will have a chance to approve it before they vote on it. This is certainly a very much a transitional budget. A few highlights of the budget are total revenue this coming 2020, this coming year is $166.5 million. We propose to use only about 7.9 of the $10.4 million available to us, the assistance available to us, the final and the third year from the province of New Brunswick. And this budget also proposes to hold wages and benefits to just about half of 1% increase. So with that, Commissioner Fudge will take us through it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Good evening, Commissioner. Thank you.
Good evening. Through you, Your Worship, members of Common Council. Last night, the Finance Committee unanimously approved sending this 2020 draft budget to Common Council. And staff was directed to bring this budget as a receive and file and to be before you this evening to answer any questions that you may have with respect to. And our intention is to come back on December 16th with a recommendation for approval for Common Council. So with that, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, this slide in particular. You're very familiar with these projections. In the City Manager's restructuring plan, he identifies the need to reduce expenditures with respect to our position with structural deficit by $10 million, based on a $9 million projected deficit in 2021 and an $11 million deficit in 2022. Council's very well aware this is notional, that in fact legislative requirements require that municipalities balance their budgets. So there would be no situation where we would have these large deficits in 2021. So with that, I want to be absolutely crystal clear to council. These cuts will occur in 2020. And with these cuts, it'll position the City of St. John to table a balanced budget in the year 2021. So 3 years ago, I presented these next couple slides to the Finance Committee. And what we talked about was sustainability. And to be sustainable, not only does the city need to grow its revenue, grow its tax base, take more control over how we generate revenue, but we must also be able to leverage opportunities to reduce cost when those opportunities arise. And there are barriers that limit the city's ability to do so, and I'll walk through some of those barriers that we talked about 2.5 years ago. The fact that we have a high percentage of the city's operating expenditures that are fixed, wages, long-term contracts, debt payments, special pension payments. This all strips flexibility out of the operating budget and prevents us from being able to do certain things that we want to do from a service perspective. Restrictive collective agreements. Collective agreements that dictate minimum staffing levels, regimented scheduling, no layoff clauses, no outsourcing clauses, all lend to potentially obstructing the city from seizing cost-saving opportunities in our business model. Binding arbitration. Wage increases decided by arbitrators that are far in excess of CPI with no consideration to taxpayer affordability or the laws of supply and demand. And of course, you're familiar with our special pension payments that are equivalent to 17% of the city's payroll cost, $9.5 million in this particular budget, and it's essentially the same as paying off a debt, which will expire in 2028. We also talked about, in these barriers to reducing our costs, the significant debt load that the city has. Over 11% of the budget represents principal and interest payments on our debt. High debt saddles operating budget room to provide services or reduce the tax rate. We talked about restructuring costs. At the time, the city had no funds set aside to carry out costs associated with moving forward with the restructuring plan. We have a significant infrastructure deficit that we spoke about. And prior to 2017, we didn't even know how much that was. The value of that was brought in through a State of the Infrastructure report in accordance with our consultants, and it's incorporated into our long-term financial planning processes. We also didn't have any reserve funds set aside to help us address the infrastructure deficit. There was a New Deal obligation in the provincial funding agreement with the city that requested that any frontline service impacts be minimized. There's the geographical footprint we talked about at this council finance committee, that you can fit Moncton and Fredericton are our geographical boundaries, and with that there's obviously cost implications. And then the cost of industry. The city's position on equitable distribution of industrial property tax revenue and provincial taxation policies respecting industry is very well documented. So with that, I say 2020 really is a year of transition for the City of St. John. And we're working through and we're making great progress in addressing our barriers, both by virtue of implementing the city manager's restructuring plan, but also with the help of the provincial government. And I'm just going to go through the progress we've made on addressing our barriers, and have categorized them in the same fashion as you saw in the previous two slides. So in terms of flexibility, the city manager's restructuring plan includes 50% of the deficit will be addressed through workforce adjustment in 2020. This will reduce the percentage of our budget that's allocated to wage and benefits, increasing flexibility in our budget. We now have a wage escalation policy in effect in 2020. And I'm also very happy to inform council that not only does the city have this policy, the police commission has adopted this policy, the aquatic center has adopted this policy, and I expect many of our other ABCs will soon adopt this policy. We continue with our higher restriction practices. We have agency boards and commissions under full review with respect to not only the amount of funding that we provide those commissions, but also their governance model. We have an RFP on the street as we speak with respect to St. John Transit service delivery. And we also have, in collaboration with our provincial partners, a provincial operating audit, which is underway, which we expect to produce synergies, operating savings, and things of that nature. Second barrier with respect to collective agreements, we do recognize that collective bargaining will be underway or is underway, and those issues will be addressed through that process. Binding arbitration barrier. Province has introduced legislation, and a law committee hearing will be scheduled to deal with binding arbitration legislation. Special pension payments. We have a third party reviewing to understand how workforce adjustments will be impacted by by the shared risk pension plan. In terms of significant debt load, we now have a debt management policy. We have a long-term financial plan that will soon be approved that sets targets. In restructuring cost, we have reserves set in place now to help us fund our restructuring. Infrastructure deficit. We have now an asset management policy. We have a capital budget policy which also allows us to, or helps us prioritize our capital investments. And we also have a long-term financial plan that has a 25% target for reducing that infrastructure deficit. New Deal obligation. I think it's easy to recognize if you have a legislative requirement to balance in 2021. Obviously, this has to be relaxed, and does not appear to be an issue with this current provincial government. Geographic footprint. The province has committed to review city boundaries and sustaining St. John three-part plan. A regional task force has been set up with a report due by the end of March 2020 to look at regional cost sharing. And as you are aware, regional facilities legislation has been introduced by the province. And with respect to cost of industry, the province has publicly indicated municipal tax reform will be completed in 2022. So we call this a transition budget, and I just want to remind the council of the definition of a budget. It's an estimation of revenue and expenses over a specified period of time and is usually compiled and reevaluated on a periodic basis. And I say that not to be cute, but the fact that we have a lot of work that is undergoing right now. We are midstream in a lot of work that could have significant impacts on the budget and budget adjustments. For example, we have collective bargaining process, 4 agreements which will in fact impact the city's workforce adjustment plans. There's significant budget implications there. We have a volunteer, potentially a workforce adjustment program being developed that will take time to roll out, which could potentially have significant budget implications. We're reviewing St. John Transit Service Review. We're looking at different alternative service delivery models for some of our ABCs. St. John Energy's growth models being reviewed. And we also are revamping our economic development agencies under one model. All carry potential significant budget impacts for 2020. The city will have certainty in early 2020 on the ability to rely on provincial reforms such as regional facilities legislation, transit property tax changes, as well as have received findings from the provincial operations audit. So with that, given the austerity measures must all be implemented in 2020 to be positioned to produce a balanced budget in 2021, given there are a number of initiatives underway that will be completed in 2020 that carry potentially significant cost implications, given it's difficult at this time to determine with any level of accuracy the proper budget adjustments that need to be made in 2020, and given that the timing of our adjustments will not impact the tax rate, we're recommending that Common Council recognize that this is a transitional budget, that Common Council recognize that all expenditure cuts will take place in 2020, but also recognize that the timing of the many projects underway makes it very difficult at this time to determine with accuracy the proper budget adjustments. We ask that Common Council receive and file this report, ask any questions this evening, and consider approving the 2020 budget as a transitional budget at its December 16th meeting of Common Council. We will also recommend at that meeting on December 16th that the city manager be directed to provide quarterly progress reports on the costs taken out of the system as a percentage of the overall projected deficit throughout 2020. I'm just going to go through the final few slides very quickly. In terms of fiscal responsibility and responsible for the temporary financial assistance, we're happy to indicate that we expect to be giving money back to the province. So you'll see on the left-hand side of this table, the 3-year funding agreement was $22.8 million, provincial funding agreement. And we're estimating, based on our performance right now, and for what we have budgeted for 2020, that we're going to need a little bit more than $16 million, and we hope to give back over $6 million back to the province, recognizing there's only one taxpayer that funds services in the province of New Brunswick and in Canada. I would highlight this is a forecast. We're still, not through 2019, but we're very confident that we're going to be able to give a significant amount of that funding back to the province. So it is recommended that Common Council in this budget also maintain the tax rate at $1.78.5 for the 12th consecutive year. Tax base is growing. It's exceeding our basic assumptions of 1.5% that we have in all of our financial models. And in 2020, the increase in revenue is mostly associated with the tax base growth of 1.83, which is 2.3 million. We have a new accommodation levy that we're expecting to produce about 1.4 million in revenue. And we expect a little bit of an increase, not as much as we had previously thought, but a little bit of an increase in the short-term financial assistance. This is just a snapshot of the changes between 2020 and 2019 with respect to our budget. I won't go through everything. I'll highlight the major changes. In regards to goods and services, what you're seeing, the big change there is we're funding more in our operating budget for road work. We're not funding more road work. We're just funding more in our operating budget and not borrowing for that work. And we also have in that goods and services some equipment and some investment for cybersecurity. The other, I guess for ABCs, the big increase that you see there is the fact that with the accommodation levy revenues, we're also required to invest those revenues into tourism-related activities. So we're going to see the revenue come in, but we're also going to see the investment made on the budget side, on the expense side. So that's the main reason for that item going up. And for other charges, really pursuant to our long-term financial plan, our funding to our pay-as-you-go and our reserve funding strategies. It's just a quick snapshot of how taxpayers' money is spent in 2020. If you were to take all of our services and put them on a price tag basis, I guess, that's what you see in this slide. So you'll see obviously the biggest, amounts associated with servicing is the ones that you would expect: transportation, debt service, and our public safety services. So our long-term financial plan is integrated into this budget. First of all, we believe this budget is sustainable, pursuant to our plan to increase pay-as-you-go by 1.25 million per year. Our wage escalation policy is in effect. We're reducing our debt balance by 2.5% in this budget, and we're also increasing our reserve funding by 10%, all helping to improve sustainability, flexibility, and vulnerability for the city. This question was asked last night in terms of our debt position. I've added this slide. Where has our debt in the general fund gone over the last 5 years? So back in 2014, we had $119 million in general fund debt. Based on our strategies, we've reduced our debt position in the general fund by over 15%. We're at $102 million in 2019. We expect by the end of 2020 it'll be close to $98 million. So the long-term debt management strategy is really paying dividends for the city and hopefully reduce the amount of debt service that's in our budget over time. Major initiatives in this 2020 budget, a lot of projects, a lot of work underway. Obviously our sustainability plan, restructuring plan, continuous improvement initiatives are still underway. We're implementing an economic development realignment. We have an action plan for a roadmap for population framework, Succeed and Stay Local Immigration Partnership. I don't have to read all this. There's a number of items on this slide that are extremely important, and it will be a lot of work for the City of St. John. So in conclusion, 2020 is a transitional budget that will give council and staff time to implement a number of structural changes to address the structural deficit. Approval of the 2020 budget is the first step towards being ready for the 2021 budget. Council has continued to show fiscal responsibility throughout the term of the funding agreement, and 2020 budget includes the commitments by council to move the city towards being sustainable, flexible, and less vulnerable. And with that, I would be pleased to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner, for your excellent presentation. And Deputy Mayor.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. I just have a few questions. On the transit service, are we calling for an RFP? And in that, what are we involving in that? Like, are we talking about the usage, how it affects the entire city, what routes we should have, and rates and so forth.
Let's have the city manager jump in, and thank you for the question. Yep.
Yes, thank you for that, Deputy Mayor, because there's a lot of uncertainty about this particular initiative. First of all, there is an RFP on the street now, and I believe it closes just after the middle of December. I believe the exact date is 19 December, but I stand to be corrected on that. The RFP is, in essence, to find an external firm that is well-positioned to come in and conduct a fundamental review of our transit system. The aim of the review is to find efficiencies. What we have made clear, both ourselves as a city, but certainly reinforced by the Transit Commission, is this is not just an exercise in cutting routes. In fact, arguably, there may not be a single route cut as this review is undertaken. We have also stressed that if there are to be efficiencies found, that we need to ensure that we do not adversely affect our priority neighborhoods in the first instance. So the RFP is on the street. We have asked that the external firm think broadly, think innovatively, and have as a target anything up to a $2 million savings. It may not materialize as $2 million, it may be less than that, but until we get the information from that external that external consulting firm, we simply will not know the future of what efficiencies can be found within our transit system.
Okay, so, but at the moment, that company hasn't been selected?
No, because the request for proposals from various companies who might be interested in doing this is still open.
Okay, and council, I guess, will be updated once? we select
Council
the
will
firm?
receive updates, but to be clear, this is a Transit Commission initiative that we asked them to undertake on behalf of the city's interests. So the RFP will be reviewed, and overall, it is a Transit Commission that will be leading this initiative.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple other questions.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Deputy.
I just wanted a little clarification on the LNG taxation. So at one time, they were holding a certain money back, or we had to wait to see if there was anyone that was going to, appeal the assessment. So is that over now? The province has now included the LNG taxation in with our regular?
So the process is the
Assessment
same. We still don't find out about the LNG assessment until the end of April. So the process is still the same. But we feel very comfortable. It's been, I think, 3 or 4 consecutive years. There's been no appeal on that legislation.
Right.
So we've incorporated that into the budget as revenue for 2020.
So then that could be taken away from us if there was an appeal? I mean, the province hasn't changed the system
Yes.
so that they included it in the
I think it's
normal
very
business.
unlikely that would happen, but if it did happen in a very low likelihood, then obviously our provincial short-term assistance would have to be adjusted for that loss of revenue.
Okay, and I understood from the way everything was presented that as we go forward in 2020, like say something happens, we save 50,000 or 100,000, whatever, that's going to be sort of documented, and then eventually you're going to come back every quarter and
Yes.
tell the council how much we've saved, or if we haven't saved any, it'll be,
Well, we have a target
Yeah.
to address a $10 million deficit. So there'll be quarterly updates, progress reports on what we've actually taken out of the system, so that you're aware throughout this year how we're going to, I guess, address that 2021 issue.
okay. And I just have one little other question on the workforce adjustment, and I know we did it on Monday night. And when we passed this on Monday night, it was stated that if a position was indicated that could be let go and we could do without, and we would not backfill. But I just want to also say, is that when we say not backfill, that means not hiring somebody to fill that, but also not put somebody in that job on a contract? I mean, I'm just thinking, I wouldn't want to see somebody's job gone, and then we bring somebody in a contract to do that job for a while, and the timing doesn't matter on that. I just think that shouldn't happen.
Okay, thank you. City Manager?
So, just for clarity, what Common Council approved on Monday evening was that the city manager was entitled to use up to $2 million for potential voluntary incentive programs for early departures. what was discussed at length is the notion that these voluntary incentive programs, or what is commonly referred to as buyouts, make no sense financially if you do not eliminate the position or eliminate an equivalent position somewhere else in the organization. So to your question directly, yes, any position, any buyout that we offer will see a position eliminated somewhere within the organization, if not that particular position, an equivalent offset somewhere else. And no, we will not be playing a shell game of eliminating a whole bunch of positions and then backfilling them with contracted support, because again, that does not achieve the aim. The aim of a buyout is to eliminate a position and accrue a savings.
Okay, well, I just want to make it clear on that, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Okay, Councillor Hickey, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very quickly, Kevin, on the portion about the bridge funding and not using the totality of it, I understand that the last time I heard, I don't know if there's an update since, but is there an understanding that we'll be able to carry that over, or is that the assumption, or what's the
City Manager.
situation there?
Thank you. City Manager?
Your worship, to the councillor, this council asked us to submit a request to the province approximately 2 months ago now, and the request to the province had 3 key elements to it. The first one is in the original funding agreement, what some people call the New Deal, the agreement of 2018. There was an agreement that if the province was to give any money to St. John, then in return, St. John would commit to not cutting frontline services during the duration of the agreement. Clearly, we cannot transition and be ready for 2021 with that policy still in place. And therefore, the letter does ask for the support of the province that in our transition year of 2020, we be allowed to, in fact, affect frontline services in, of course, a reasonable and pragmatic way. That was the first request within the letter. The second request within the letter was a request to carry forward any unused funds to 2021 and beyond in order to offset the challenges that we are expected to face in 2021 and beyond. And the third request in the letter was in the 2020 year, could we use some of the unexpended money to cover some of our restructuring costs? For example, the one that we just spoke about this evening, the fundamental review of transit is going to cost quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm. Could we use some of our unspent interim funding to cover some of those restructuring costs? We have not received the formal reply from the province. I am led to believe, and I think I am safe in saying, that they will have no difficulty with removing the proviso that we cannot touch frontline services. On the 2 other issues, I think it would be best for us to wait until we get the official reply from the province.
And is in not spending the totality of it an anticipation of that?
No, not spending the totality of it is as a result of 2 things. First of all, our simple fiscal responsibility, being austere, making sure we don't spend money we don't need to spend. But secondly, and we've been asked this question quite often, why don't we just spend it all? The most simplistic example I can give you is why don't we take the money and plus up one of our reserves? In the original agreement, it is quite clear that money is to be provided only to conduct business as usual, if you will. So we can't use that money for things that we would not have normally done. And that's why clearly we could come up with very innovative ideas to spend the entire amount, but that was not the essence of the agreement, and we cannot do that. It must be for things that business as usual type things is the best way to describe it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Excuse me. Oh, my cough. Okay, perfect. And Councillor McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Kevin, for the presentation. Being on the Growth Committee, this is kind of new to me, but anyway, we talked about the slide where you have all of the breakdowns on what, percentage of your taxes go to what, right? Mm-hmm. The first one's Growth Community Development, $94 out of, I guess, $3,035. Okay, do we have a comparison of what it would be in Moncton or Fredericton for all of these categories?
I don't hear it at hand. I don't have it here, but it'd be something that we could do to benchmark for sure.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing, for example, solid waste collection. We're spending $69 out of somebody's $3,035. What's the cost of Moncton and Fredericton? You know, and so on all the way down. Just to give us some sort of an idea. Now, I think what's really going to impact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is debt servicing costs. Theirs are a lot different than ours.
Yeah, I mean, there's differences. When you benchmark, you have to be really careful that you're comparing
Yeah.
apples to apples.
Yeah.
You know, some cities have transit as a department or police departments as a department versus we have commissions. Some cities do fiscal charges differently, so we'd have to not just take the numbers on their budget, but actually have to have some conversations with them to make sure we're doing a fair comparison.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to hear that. So we talked about starting off with a $12 million deficit, and I'm happy to hear that we're down to 10. What happens if that goes down to 8? What's that do to this?
We should be happy.
We'll be very happy. Don't get me wrong.
Hot
But-
dogs for everybody.
But I'm wondering, you know, is there areas within this slide that we could be, you know, spending more on that we're not if we had the opportunity to? And maybe, you know, arts and culture, for example, maybe Fredericton and Moncton are so far ahead of us in that category that, you know, if we had a few extra dollars, that might be something we'd want to, you know, trying to draw people and grow the city, we got to look at what, you know, other cities are doing to grow their population, is all I'm getting at. And we talk about the pension. So some of this relies on how many people we have to have within that plan to make it, to keep it viable, right? I mean, that was going back to the 2016 agreement.
Yeah, so we're undergoing a review in terms of what implications there would be from a restructuring exercise on the shared risk pension plan.
Right.
We're not completely done the review, but we don't see any impediments from the city manager's restructuring plan right now with respect to that. So we're pretty confident that that won't be an issue.
Okay, now that's a two-pronged pie there, right? Because you got trying to maybe spread it over another 2 years?
No, that's a different.
That's a different thing?
That's a different issue. That's a different issue.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, did you have a comment, City Manager?
Your worship, members of council, yes. You know, we should be quite happy if the anticipated deficit goes less than 10. If it does, I think we will be at the point where we will have to be coming back to council to have an in-depth discussion with council about what we wish to do at that point in time. There are possibilities, as you suggested, Councillor, of perhaps upping budgets within certain areas. There is also a desire of council to lower tax rates. And perhaps that's where the differential goes. I think that's a question for another day because of the amount of uncertainty we have now. It would just be a great deal of wasted time and effort to physically address that right at this moment. On the pension thing, just to say it a different way to what the Commissioner of Finance said, but it means the same thing. Right now, what we anticipate may be necessary in terms of workforce adjustments will not put our shared risk pension plan that we all enjoy, all city employees enjoy, at risk.
Not all city employees.
All city employees, less council.
Just wanted to clarify. Okay, thank you, City Manager. Councillor Casey, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a few comments. Just an interesting fact on the St. John Transit Service. As far as I can tell, we are the only one that sends a bus to the airport. Moncton and Fredericton do not. And as you know, we are a lot bigger than them. So I'd like to see a review of that. I think there's some savings to be had. How much is a different story, but I'd just like to see a review in general. I'm glad we're doing our geographic footprint, or at least looking at it. I'm very in favor of building up and density. You know, because I don't like paying for roads. I'd rather spend it on arts and culture or something like that. And I'm also glad we're putting more money into fixing roads without actually having to borrow for it. You know, I don't want to give, I don't want to pay any, you know, I don't want to give a bank any more money. So I'm very happy about that. So, yeah, that's about it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Deputy Mayor, back to you.
Well, there's just a small question. We're not on finance, you see, so we have to ask the questions tonight. And when you say major corporate initiatives, when you say the last one there is maintain funding urban development incentives for Central Peninsula, we talked about that the other night. So are you saying that in 2020, you're going to have a review of this again to look at it to see if you can change what we sort of talked about the other night that we were talking
No,
about for
what this means is
2021?
the funding for the urban development incentives in the Central Peninsula Heritage and Arts Grant programs are included in the draft 2020 budget. I think they're for review for 2021 and 2022.
Opera's 21,
Yeah.
22.
But we are going to keep them for 2020.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
that's fine.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you. Counselor Reardon.
Thank you, Worship. I was here last night with this, so I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day, so I'm going to...
We'll see if you ask the same questions
I think
tonight.
I will.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, and it's difficult, it's a difficult budget. We're going to have 2 very difficult years, and so I struggle with, I guess, returning some of that money. And I know the city manager's already explained it, why we have to, because it's business as usual. But I only have the budget from 19 and from 20, so I don't know if a lot of those things that are in my budget historically have gone up a little bit. But there's a lot of things in this budget that haven't gone up at all, and things that haven't gone up probably over a long time. And I look at the neighborhood grants even, and I would say that would be business as usual if it's historically gone up. I don't know how that fits in, because
Yeah.
I know there's no definition of frontline services.
Well, I'll
and
tell you
those
how
sorts
the
of-
process works. So we've already been audited once by the province for the first year's funding. Actually, no funds will be released until they're comfortable with our progress reports and our audits. So they go through our records with a fine-tooth comb. And when we had put this funding agreement in place, one of the appendices in the agreement actually had a schedule of what we said our expenses were going to be and basis for why we needed funding, short-term funding. So they're reviewing that, they're doing variance analysis, they're looking at our expenditures to making sure it's business as usual. So there are checks and balances there that would prevent us, even if we wanted to use money that we that isn't based on the original contract.
I guess, I mean, they haven't done this before, as far as I know, so it's all based on interpretation. So my interpretation of business as usual would be whatever, if things have gone up historically according to the cost of living or whatever, that would be business as usual. Maybe they would say no. And I know that you've worked on that.
Your worship to the counselor, just for a point of clarity, the phrase "business as usual" is mine to try to generally explain what we're talking about. Commissioner of Finance had a far more accurate depiction. There is an appendices in the agreement that we submitted and said, this is what we're going to spend it on. If it's not in that appendices, it's not fair game.
It's a tough one. And I guess the other thing I will say is that, and these aren't my words, but I sit over here and I look at council priorities, which is our vision. But really, that's on the wall, it's words. Your vision is really in your budget. And I know that these next couple of years are really going to be not very visionary for us because they're going to be so lean years. But there are some numbers in there I talked about last night. I think that, I don't know. It's, when I look at what we've put in, what we're putting in for Discover St. John, if we're getting into the nitty-gritty of some of that stuff, I'd like to see us maintain that. I mean, we have, of the 3 major cities, we have the lowest number of rooms. A lot of the other cities will be collecting $2.5 million in levies, which they will then add on to their tourism budget. So you'll be competing against cities that have $5-6 million in a budget that we've reduced to, a significant amount. I don't know if that's business as usual or not, to have that money in Discover St. John, because we've had it there before. So anyways, I guess I mean, I'm on finance. It's been coming through. The more I read it, the more I struggle with it. It's a difficult budget. It's going to be even harder. The transitional thing is an unknown, I guess, for me as well, as we try to move through this and get us to 21 and 22. So it's a hard budget to, I guess, to put the rubber stamp on and say we're going for it, especially where now it's one thing, I don't know where it's going over 20 with our staff I'm mostly concerned about. So those are my comments for tonight. Thank you. Great job, though, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of overall comments, and apologies to the finance crew who heard some of these things last night. I think it's important for us, really with regards to returning money, we have to live within our means. And just because we have money available, in my opinion, we shouldn't be spending it. We should be working to be as efficient and as effective as possible, and if that means we do continuous improvement because we save money, I think we do that. Not only because do I think it's prudent there's one taxpayer, but that's what we want to see in all of our departments throughout the organization. I'm lucky enough to sit on police commission, and we have a fantastic chief down there, or up the hill, I guess, who has spent the last couple of years doing as much as he can, and any opportunity he has in the police force to save a dime, he saves the dime. And certainly within that organization, sub-organization of us, that's what we try to follow. If there's money to be saved to help us be more efficient, maybe it'll help us be more effective in another area. The fact that we will have police officers driving Corollas is a good example of that sort of thinking. And we want it throughout the organization. So I think for us to do it as council on the global scale, I think it's very, very important. The other piece that, Growth Committee, I will highly suggest you look into the finance documents that we had from last night, if you haven't had an opportunity already to get a little bit of a peek of the 10-year financial plan. There is some real vision and hope and goal at the end of that plan in 2025 and then 2028 with regards to tax rate. And while this is a transitional budget, really it's that old adage of you plan the work and then you work the plan. And this is really the start of that. Our finance folks did a wonderful job of taking smart accounting policy and printing it in English that everybody will understand. Items like, you don't buy new furniture for the living room when your roof is leaking. You fix the roof. And there's all sorts of good, easy to understand English attached to the financial policies that we have passed, and certainly what I see in this budget. It is a transitional budget, but it really sets up, it's not something that we're going to reap a reward next year, but what it is the city of St. John's going to start reaping rewards 5 and 8 years plus down the road because we're setting that table. So I just thank you to the work that staff has done, and as much as it's a whole lot of numbers, I've really enjoyed being on the Finance Committee and helping to work this through. So those would be my comments on the budget. It's certainly, it's an incredibly kind of status quo-ish thing while we work through next year. So there's nothing to really dance about, except if you look at the long-term financial plan that we have for the city and see where we're going, it makes these boring numbers really exciting. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. I guess I'll keep it down to a ground level, which I'm at. Thank you for a great report. I believe, Councillor Reardon, to your point, that so we had $3 extra million. I don't believe in spending any of it, because you know what that does in business? You have to take that back when the money's not there. And in government, when they give, they never take it back. And that's why you have so many programs, so much going on. So I appreciate the discipline from the Finance Council of getting this. It's not the dream budget, but it's a sensible budget, and I really love the plan, the 10-year plan. Finally, I don't know people who have followed this. St. John had no plan. We're 178 years old. We had no plan. Who does that? Hello, St. John, New Brunswick. We had no financial plan. Can you imagine? So, I mean, this is all the credit to the Finance Committee and Kevin Fudge, the commissioner, and we've done a bunch of things in these 3 years. And I know I'm on a little rant here, but the three greatest things since I've been on council is we're actually making accountability of things for the city of St. John. Assets. We didn't even know what we owned. And now we're coming to that. And I know there's going to be some pain, but you know what? There's always pain before you get gain, and no matter what it is in life. So I think we're on the right road. I appreciate what the Finance Committee has done. We didn't spend the money. I hate giving it back too. But you know what? It's the right thing to do. Because you got to remember, we never had that money 3 years ago or 2 years ago, whenever we got it. And this council deserved a lot of credit because we did vote. We had the budget, and then we were offered the money, and we took the money. And we took it as a team, but we did have the fortitude to make the right decision back then, and we're doing it again today. So that whether the public knows it or not, this council deserves a lot of credit for making the hard decisions, and now we have the direction. And you read that 10-year plan, it's awesome, but it's hard to believe we didn't have one. So thank you very much, and to the Finance Committee. Thank you.
Love your passion. Thank you, sir. Councillor everyone's spoken twice, so I'm a little out of order, but Councillor Reardon, back to you, please.
Thank you, Worship. The last thing I will say is, and I'll follow up on Councillor Armstrong, is has St. John been on a wrong path? Absolutely. Have they done things that they could have done better? Definitely. But at the end of the day, when the tax money all rolls in, you have to remember that the province of New Brunswick is keeping 45% of your commercial and your industry taxes. So what that means is that there is basically, in my opinion, no business case for you to look for commercial or industry in your community. You have dirt, you have noise, you have bird kills, you have smells, you have risks, you have explosions, you have all kinds of things. You are stuck with 100% of the infrastructure that supports all that. So at the end of the day, that's where your real problem is. And I don't want us to ever lose sight of that, because we can manipulate all these things here at this table. But the bottom line is we need those tax dollars. So if we had those tax dollars, I wouldn't need money coming from the province over and above that. I wouldn't need a bridging structure. I wouldn't need anything. I would just need the tax dollars, and away we could go. So that's another place where I have my struggle, is I don't want the public to be convinced that this is all St. John's mismanagement. It isn't. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Worship. So I just want to speak for a minute on clarification here, because not being on the Finance Committee, I'm hearing in one sentence that we're asking the provincial government to allow us to keep the 2.8 million or 2.4, whatever it is, to help us through 2020 or 21-22. And on the other hand, I'm hearing that we should give the money back and live within our means. And I'm hoping that nobody thinks that that's the case for 21-22, because we're certainly not living within our means. We're cutting real deep. So just for clarification, we do want that money for 21 and 22. We're not giving it back without an ask to get it in return, to give it back to us.
That's correct.
Okay.
The ask within the letter was for the provincial government to consider allowing us to carry forward the surplus into 21 and 22 to help offset the challenges that we will have in those 2 years.
Exactly, because, and to Councillor Blake's comment, I understand, in business you have good years and bad years, but the good years, when you make the money, you put it aside to help in the bad years, right? That's what everybody does. So, I just wanted to make clarification on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Councillor Armstrong.
I just want to, as Councillor Reardon speaks so eloquently and reminds me, it says it all. I wasn't trying to downgrade St. John. We've just been in the wrong direction for a long. Fair taxation, as I say it every 2 weeks. She speaks a lot more eloquently than I ever will, but it's all about fair taxation. We take all the down low cost and we have the heavy industry and we don't get any tax. Fair taxation and assessments. Thank you, Councillor Reardon.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. think we'll just, Deputy Mayor.
Well, you can speak ahead of me if you like.
No, I'd like to sum up if I could.
Well,
so
the
we'll-
only thing I'd like to say, this is a good budget for 2020. We're going to go ahead, we're going to make our cuts in 2020, whatever we have to do to prepare ourselves for 21, 22. But I'd never, ever like to criticize or prejudge or whatever the people behind us. The former councils and the former staff members of this city, they had plans too. They did all kinds of studies in our history, and they've done a good job. We had a Vision 2015. It was done like in 11 or 2012. So I never like to criticize past staff. Yes, we have some new policies, and that's wonderful. But all the people behind us have made this great city. They've all done the best they could each year that they were here. And I'm not in favor of saying, well, we didn't have plans, we didn't do this, they did it wrong. They didn't do it wrong. They built St. John, and we're living in what they've done and going forward. And you know, I hope that 5 years from now, that whoever's sitting around this table or wherever this table is at that time doesn't say, well, those councils in the past, they didn't do it right. Everybody that's on council that's elected for the city, every senior staff person we have, every employee we have, we can only hope that in their time, they've always done the best for the citizens of St. John. I have to say that because, you know, some of you always bring up how terrible it was in the past. It wasn't terrible in the past. That's how we got the great city we have today. Everybody that worked in the past did a good job, and we're doing the best job we can, and we're going forward, hoping that this city grows and becomes better and better. You know, yesterday I went out to a group of 300 and some women and spoke to them, and every one of them is so proud of St. John and what they do for St. John. And we have so many citizens, and I'm passionate about this, that do so much for this city, and they do it free of charge, and they enjoy life here, and they live here, and they think it's a great city. Amen.
Amen, everyone. I feel like motion to adjourn, please. So just kidding. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, maybe Councillor Merrithew, I'll have you, maybe you want to speak again, and then I'd like to make a couple of comments.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for the comments, and I do want to, a few thank yous. First of all, to staff. This is our fourth budget that finance has put through, and without you folks, the brain power in your sincerely in your department, Kevin, I don't think we could have done it without you, and I sincerely mean that. Thank you to the committee, because they've been on board, they've asked the right questions, they've been positive, even when, you know, when the light's a little dimmer in the room, we've had to make cuts. This is realistic budgets that we're doing. I'm so proud of these people on committee. And thank you, Councillor Sullivan, for bringing up that 10-year plan, because I hope we see that in committee soon. It really is light at the end of the tunnel. You can see light there, sincerely. With that, I'll end with sustainable, flexible, and less vulnerable. You've done a great job. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I maybe got you out of sequence. I should have had you end us with all the thanks, but I do have a couple of comments and a couple of questions, if I might. So thanks very much, everyone, for, I'll go to maybe the questions first. Thanks very much for all of the comments tonight, and I think the description that through you, Commissioner of Finance, but obviously with, I'm sure, lots of input from your senior team. Just the way you framed up this budget as a transitional budget, it's quite unique that we start out the year, $7, $8, $9 million behind, and we have to be at zero. So we have less than 365 days to restructure ourselves and get. So that means that 2020 is all about restructuring. Can you just speak just at a very high level in the finance, our finance chair, who should also be thanked, by the way, who's done tremendous work on behalf of this council and the citizens that he represents as our finance chair. Can you just speak at a very high level, Kevin? I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek. Did you just start this budget a week ago, or has this been I want the public to understand that because sometimes there's sort of this I'll call it insinuation. Well, we weren't consulted, or we didn't this, but this is we have been talking about this every week, every month. Every finance committee, how much has gone into getting us to tonight, Kevin? Can you give us just a high level?
There's been a lot that's gone into tonight. It's not just the budget, it's the governance process, the policies, setting ourselves up for success. One of the benefits back when this council decided to expand the mandate of the finance committee, In previous terms, the Finance Committee was really an auditing committee. You'd have your auditors come in and they present the statements and you'd ask your questions, and that was pretty much the scope of that committee. And then in 2016, it was expanded to include continuous improvement, to include policy development, to include financial management. Council made fiscal responsibility a priority. And so we've been working at this for 4 years to get to this point. And I think we've got the foundation in place. And yeah, my staff, the whole team has put in a lot of hours into the plan and the budget. So I want to thank everybody here for your patience as well.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to add a comment, City Manager? Yep, City Manager.
Your Worship, members of Council, just one additional comment. Absolutely, the finance team has been instrumental in this. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the entire city team has been instrumental in this, because every functional area starts this budgeting process by taking a look internally at the efficiencies, et cetera, that can be achieved. So it's not, it was the entire team, and it is, I'll be tongue-in-cheek, as you were, we start the next budget year
Now.
as soon as the current budget year is approved.
Right. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to put, I may have another question for you, Mr. Fudge. I'm going to put your podium mic back on, so thanks. So I'll just try to rapid fire through this. So I find sometimes we're not in this debate, but I'm being repetitive, growth, fiscal, and reforms. It's not one more important than the other. I truly believe this council, supported by our amazing staff, at all levels have done a really great job of having the right conversations. And to build on what the deputy said, and I'm probably at times guilty of that. I don't mean it. I do believe in being direct. I am a driven individual. And I don't like the word status quo. I don't think we should ever use the word status quo. And to build on what the deputy said, I think it is every council's obligation to build on what the council prior did and make it better. And I truly believe that we've done that, and I hope that those of us that are here next time and those after us keep doing it. And I guess if sometime 10 or 15 years from now I'm not lucky enough to be here anymore and you want to slam me because you're making it better, slam me. Because that's a mindset of continuous improvement and being driven and making the organization better. I've already talked about restructuring. Leadership is really being demonstrated here. I can't tell you how excited this individual is that we spoke about the barriers, or you could call them opportunities, but we're actually acting on them. Those barriers in the slide, I know some of us don't like the word barriers, but let's drive straight into the wave. Until you address those, this community will not go to the next level. So I'm so happy that this organization has led and is dealing with those items. Because frankly, it's cost the taxpayers millions of dollars, many, many millions of dollars. Transit, a comment, City Manager, I'm getting feedback, first of all, to the community. I think we would all agree transit's very important to this community. Thank you for your clarity, City Manager. But some of the feedback that I'm hearing is transit has been studied and studied and studied. So what's different this time? In this particular piece, and could you please make a comment on the difference between cutting transit versus trying to find efficiencies in transit? Thank you.
Your Worship, what's different this time, if there is something different, is that we really are, through the request for proposals, looking for a fundamental review. In other words, everything is on the table, everything will be looked at. It's just not a question of what's the passengers on each bus route and which bus route do we cut. It's much more holistic than that. To give you an example of some of the stuff that will be looked at, does it continue to make sense to have parking in transit as a separate commission of the city, or are there efficiencies to be had by having it under the city staff moving forward? That will have nothing to do with the routes, but yet it will be part of the fundamental review. And there's new innovations, new technologies to help process funding, to buy passes, there's new innovations in terms of bus technologies. Do we still need 50 passenger buses on all our routes, or can we have some other transportation on those routes? That's all part of the fundamental review, and those examples, again, have nothing to do with cutting service.
Perfect, thank you. And on that, you just flashed an idea into my head that I'm hopeful that as that review happens, it goes to the stratosphere in terms of innovation. I don't even know where this is coming from, but you shot it into my head. If the objective is to move people around a city efficiently and affordably, how do we consider every single option to do that actively, by foot, by taxi, by ride sharing, by volunteers, by, sorry, Councilor, I didn't. By, yeah, you know what I mean? So let's really be wide in our scope. Thank you for that. Thank you, Commissioner, for dialing in to the provincial funds. I understand the questions around that. I've always understood the documents and the obligation that we had was to be frugal fiscal managers. That's why personally I was a bit upset back a number of months ago when it was being suggested we weren't frugal, that we were perhaps doing. I think your documents tonight have shown very clearly that this organization, led by, by a council, by a staff, by your department, has been very solid fiscal managers and didn't just waste money because, quote unquote, we could. So thank you for that tonight. Almost done. Moving forward, council, whether it's us, whether it's the next councils, whatever that makeup is, and even for staff, this is all about leadership, discipline, focus, moving forward. I think we have a very bright future. I don't describe this budget as bad. I describe it actually as very optimistic and hopeful. A lot of work coming in the first quarter of 2020. And lastly, I'll end. It's a draft at this stage. Councillor Sullivan, you mentioned it. I think that the draft long-term financial plan, if the comprehensive, let's be more optimistic. Comprehensive tax reform is coming. It's going to come through. We're going to get a dividend out of St. John Energy. We're going to get regional cost sharing. We're going to continue to work our fundamental cost challenges down. We're going to, many of the elements that we've been discussing, they've all come through. And by 2028, in our optimistic model, we are going to return. So the slide you had up with the $170,000 household, we're going to give that household back $365. I'm just going to repeat it. We're going to reduce your tax bill by $365 and give it back to you. And if we're successful doing that, I'd say we're going to be one of the best run municipalities in the entire country. So thank you very much for letting me speak. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Great. Okay, on the question, I'll call it. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Thank you. Motion is carried. Next item, Common Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Fudge. Oh, excuse me, sir. Thank
Your Worship, 1.2 on the agenda is the 2020 Utility Fund Operating Budget.
Okay, and Mr. Brent McGovern, our Commissioner of Water, will give us I understand, a 2-hour presentation, Mr. McGovern, tonight? Okay, the timer's on. I've been told to warn you, the timer is on, sir.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I will try to keep this brief, knowing that this budget was before the Finance Committee at the November 20th meeting of the Finance Committee. And before I get into it, I don't know if the chair of the Finance Committee wanted to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Very, very briefly. So a couple of things to note about this budget, utility budget. This is a 0% increase budget. The other thing I'd like to note that this budget, note that the industry is paying its fair share, remembering that industry is using industrial raw water, all right, and not treated water. And I'll also note that staff's done a very good job again this year getting us to a zero increase, and I have, and I do have their commitment to make whatever increases might be in the years forward minimal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Back to you, Mr. McGovern.
So just looking at the plan, the intent was to be here a couple nights ago, and so we're here this evening. recommending first and second reading of bylaw amendments, and with the plan to be back on December 16th for a third reading of the bylaw amendments, so that we have-
Sorry, Mr. McGovern, with just quite a slight technicality. This item had been tabled, folks, from the other night, so I need a motion to move it off the table. Second, moved by the deputy, second by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, all those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? I had been reminded earlier and I forgot. I apologize. So back to you,
Thank you,
sir.
Your Worship. So the intent being to be back on December 16th for third reading of the bylaw amendments so that we have rates established for 2020. And this proposed budget is based on the potable water rate study that was presented to council, as well as the east and west industrial water rate studies that were presented back in November 18th. As Chair of the Finance Committee mentioned, there's no proposed increase for flat rate users. For 2020, it's proposed to remain at $1,428. As part of the rate study, it was explained on November 18th to council that there would be a major shift in the sewer charge from or to 80.35% of the water cost from 122% that it's currently at. And that's due to a shift in expenditures associated with Safe Clean Drinking Water Project, and where there were significant expenditures, given that it's a multiplier applied, that amount has dropped significantly. Going forward, there will be a continued focus on debt reduction, and this is really something to be celebrated. As the Commissioner of Finance pointed out, the general fund debt is decreasing, but the utilities is decreasing as well, and actually at a much faster rate. So there's no new debt proposed for 2020. This council began that fiscally prudent practice of not taking on any more debt in 2018. That is significant and will have positive impacts for ratepayers in the long term. The utility debt balance by the end of 2020 will be just over $88 million. That's an 18% reduction in the utility debt in just 2 years. Looking ahead 5 years, you can see on the slide that debt projections will continue to fall to just under $63 million. That's a 41.5% reduction in debt in 7 years from the 2017 peak. And then we also are contributing $5.1 million to capital from operating in 2020. And we have been successful with various funding initiatives over the years. And this year we have been successful as well. And we're seeking $10.6 million. So that would be over 200% leveraging of the ratepayers from, or the monies from the utility ratepayers. And to date, as of now, at this point for 2020, we have confirmed funding, additional funding above and beyond the $5.1 million being contributed by ratepayers of $7.32 million. And we're waiting word from the bilateral funding agreement, which would bring in, we're hoping, an additional $3.2 million. So that is something that will alleviate pressure on rates. As you know, we do have a large infrastructure deficit from the state of the infrastructure report that was presented. And we're trying to do everything we can to leverage ratepayers' money so that we can invest as much in those assets as possible, so that we have the infrastructure in place and the foundation to allow the city to continue to grow. So this is significant funding, and that's not something that was built into our rate study, and we will be coming back in the new year to touch on that and explain how that could have beneficial impacts. So again, no proposed increase for the flat rate. However, there is continued pressure on the potable water users, and costs continue to rise. And as you can see here on the graph, for those on the Finance Committee that would have seen this, but others would have not yet, And so the flat rate customers are decreasing. And so in just 30 months, we've lost 395 flat rate customers. And that is as a result of vacant derelict buildings that get torn down. As you know, at council, every 2 weeks there are buildings that need to come down, also as a result of fires or industrial incidents. You recall not that long ago we had an industrial incident resulted in purchase of 25 to 30 homes that get torn down. That has an impact on the utility because that's our revenue that is being impacted. So we remain focused on reducing costs through the continuous improvement initiatives that you regularly hear about. Also in reducing staff. In 2019 alone, we reduced staffing by 6 full-time equivalents as we ramped down the Safe Clean Drinking Water project. We are seeking and getting new funding, as I talked about, trying to leverage every dollar. But the bottom line is we need to grow, and we can't keep spreading increasing costs over a shrinking customer base. So when I say we need growth on the infrastructure that we already have in place. So we do have a vast network of pipes, and it's really about infilling and making best use of those assets that our citizens are already paying for, so that we can spread that cost out over more people without taking on new infrastructure burdens. And as I mentioned, some customers, or maybe I should just back up. Out of that 395 customers, a lot of them are teardowns, but some of them would be customers that would have transitioned as well from a flat rate to a meter. So it could be a single family home that is now being used as a daycare, and because there's a business operating there, there'd be a meter installed. So, but when you look at the metered revenue, which is this slide, you can see that metered revenue has gone down, or consumption has gone down, which translates into metered revenue going down. So we're not making up for that decrease in customers on increase in volumetric water sales. So when we look ahead to 2020 and some of the highlights of the budget and budget initiatives, safety and security, workplace improvements at various underground vaults that we have around the city and chambers to improve the security and the access into those. We're also making investments in keeping the electronic and communication infrastructure, of which we have a very vast infrastructure across the city, far greater than our neighboring cities of Fredericton and Moncton. And this, the electronic investments are being done with funding assistance. In potable water, we will be cleaning and inspecting, maintaining 2 out of the 10 water storage reservoirs. We tend to do 2 of those a year, so they all get done on a 5-year cycle. Fire hydrant painting program, we'll be attending to repainting approximately 800 of our fire hydrants, and with the focus in the Uptown and Milledgeville area. Undertake key water transmission main interconnections so that we further improve water system reliability. Inspect a number of the dams that we have in accordance with the Canadian Dam Safety Association guidelines, and protect the environment through the addition of containment, as well as was presented earlier this year in council, participate in the water bottle filling station and this with CCAN that's being constructed. And with respect to wastewater, dredging of cells 1 and 2 at the Lancaster Lagoon to improve operational efficiency, and then doing some specific maintenance at the Eastern Wastewater Treatment Facility, and a continuation of the newly established video inspection program and flushing program, where we plan to complete another 65 kilometers of video inspection in 2020. And with that, Your Worship, turn it back to you, and the recommendation is up there on the screen.
Well, Mike, thank you very much. Councillor Merrithew?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Montgomery, again, thank you very much, sir. Great budget. Glad to see there's zero here. I didn't mention in my prelude that Finance Committee is looking for council to pass this first and second reading. But just a couple of comments as well. I realize that you've got to maintain infrastructure. I realize that's a costly job. I'm just one councillor, but and we've talked about this. We've also got to take note and pay attention to the costs to the client, the citizens out there. So it's a tough juggle that you're doing. And again, I thank you very kindly for it. When I see the figure of we're down 390, was it?
564.
I apologize.
395.
Thank you kindly. 395 households using the water. It's hard for me to fathom. I realize that we've torn some down. I wouldn't trade that program in for Lovener money. That's a great program, dilapidated building program. I realize that we had an incident on the east side, okay, where you bang your head against the goal, where it cost the city of St. John vast amount of overtime. It put our citizens in jeopardy, and then the corporation involved who goes out and buys 25 or 30 homes, tears them down. We're not getting water revenue, and we're not getting tax revenue. And it's just, again, you just want to go home some days, put your head under the pillow. Well, I'm telling you. I, again, can't thank you enough for the job that you're doing here. This is a tough file and has been a tough file for you and your staff. I don't know the end of it. I'm so very glad to see the debt coming down the way it has. And again, I would plead with you that minimal increases in the future, if it's at all possible, please. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you,
Okay, thank you, sir.
Or, Brent.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Brent, I'm happy with it, zero increase, really happy to see that. Flushing hydrants, I've been talking about this for years. When are we going to stop hiring somebody to do that? Give me some good news here.
Your Worship, through you. So we began that process, as we had mentioned, in terms of starting to transition knowledge to our workforce in 2019. In 2020, our plan is to have 1 and 1. So there'd be one contracted employee with one full-time employee, which will further reduce our costs and allow us to further gain knowledge. We will not have the ability to fully go away from that service. Where we can get to, and I say that because the flushing sequences that are required through that program require proprietary software, something that we don't own, we can't purchase. And so we would rely on a company to run those for us, and then we could execute. But we are continuing with the transition that we had laid out earlier this year. And so next year we will be reducing our costs. There's also a benefit there in that we have been flushing our system annually. And that is because the water quality had not been very good, and we had, when we had storms, we had high turbidity events that would result in boil water orders and those sorts of things. Now we have very good water quality, and we're seeing that on the flushing time. So when we actually flush water systems, we flush to a certain quality standard, and we're seeing that the time to actually get there is far shorter. And so we will be having discussions with the regulator, and there may be the possibility to actually reduce our flushing obligation so that it become every 2 years as opposed to every year because of the high quality of drinking water that we have.
I was going to say, I think there's other areas that don't do it every year. They do it every 2. Okay, that's good news. I'll take that. Video equipment. Do we have our own equipment, or do we contract that out?
We contract it out right now. It's, we tried it a number of years ago, and you need the mechanical staff and people that are full-time able to work on cameras, because as soon as your camera goes down, you're out of business and you have a crew on standby. And it's very expensive equipment. So the cost, the unit cost for us has been really good with contracting that service out, and they're available and they're going, full time for us essentially to get the 65 kilometers done a year.
Okay. The last thing I want to ask is, are we looking at any possibilities of expanding where we have lines? I know we had one that was going out to Rosse, and it was cut off. But we have people that are worried about wells going dry, wells getting contaminated, that sort of thing. We lost 395 rate users.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a effort on to try to gain those back through expanding our, where we have, the infrastructure to do so? I'm not suggesting that we start laying new pipes, but do we have any kind of a marketing plan or anything to try to get those back?
Well, that comes with growth and development, and a portion of our capital budget, that was passed earlier this year, was dedicated to growth and development. So we remain in sync with growth and community development as well as Develop SJ to understand where the new development is happening, so that we have the infrastructure in place that meets the needs of the developer, so that they get a green light when they come to the city of St. John. And we're always working to stay one step ahead of that, and the capital program this year is no different. There are a number of projects that tie directly to growth and development in the city of St. John, without expanding assets, really preparing the existing assets to take on the infrastructure. For example, the telegraph announcement, or the Gothic Arches building on Princess Street, those sorts of examples. And a lot of these areas we have combined sewers, which creates challenges. If we don't have the proper infrastructure in place for us and the regulator to actually be able to sign off on that, it's not necessarily a slam dunk, and we need to, in all of these instances, pretty well invest money to prepare to ensure that it meets the needs of the development.
And I guess just to clarify, that, to me, new developments, once they're going up, that's the low-hanging fruit. They're going to need water, electricity. But the people that have been in houses for 20, 30, 50 years that are on wells, are we reaching out to them saying, if you have a concern about your well water, instead of having,
Okay.
we can hook you up at you know what I mean? That's what I'm kind of looking at, new connections.
Yeah, and really that, with respect to the homes that have wells, the service is there. It becomes a cost for them, so they're already paying approximately half the cost of the flat rate because the service goes in front of their home. Mm-hmm. And it really becomes a decision point for the customer as to whether or not they want to connect in to the system and pay the other 50% or not. And that's an individual choice by each homeowner.
Okay. Councillor, can I just jump in there? If you have some more, come back around. Okay, thank you, sir. Deputy Mayor.
Well, thank you, Worship. Well, I'll move the recommendation first.
Thank you.
The other thing is, I think we should.
Second, thank you. Moved and seconded by Councillor Hickey. Thank you. Go ahead.
I
Deputy.
think we should all be exciting. It's very exciting here tonight, Brent. Probably hasn't been a water commissioner that was able to stand at that podium and say there was no increase for the last 10 years, 15 years. I don't know. We've had an increase every year, so it's pretty exciting. There's no increase for 2020. Of course, we don't know what goes on beyond that, but I want to say that the water department has done a lot of work this year, and congratulations for everything, because not only have you worked towards no increase for 2020, but you've also done the clean water treatment plant, and it's been a big project of the city, the most expensive one we've ever had, and probably the most expensive one we'll ever have for a lifetime. But it's all completed now, so congratulations on it. And I think that, I'm not being funny, I'm just saying we should be very happy that we can at least have 1 year, 2020, that there's no increase in water rates. And because we've already been told by consultants that we have to keep the infrastructure up, and we'll have to see where all that goes. But it's exciting that there's no new costs for 2020.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Commissioner McGovern, normally at this time of year, you and I have a very robust conversation about rates, and very happy about the zero increase. And I thought, do we take the year off from our robust conversation? But, it's tradition. My calculation says that the information you've given us tonight, of the $1,400 that we're paying for the flat rate, about $380 of that every year is retiring that debt. So I guess my question and my challenge, the robust conversation we've had over the last couple of years really came from a financial plan around St. John Water that said $72 is the increase because we know and we're marching. And then last year we got a little change to the plan because we could see what was actually happening. And here we are at zero, which is great. I guess my starter question is this zero part of a plan, or is it just a one-year plan that we knew we could give a break because clean, safe drinking water is finished and we're doing some transition?
Yeah, it's 1 year right now. Like the general fund, the utility fund also has challenges. We have contracts that have minimum numbers. We also have a significantly high infrastructure deficit. So it's $314 million, with 70% of that 70 million out of that 314 million that is in the extreme asset category. That is assets that are failing. And when you look at the capital from operating that should be flowing into the infrastructure, it equates to $25 million a year. Yet we're putting in capital from operating of $5 million a year. So the terracotta sewers that were put in the mid-1800s that we're still using now, we can't continue to use forever. And the new developments that are going up in our South Central Peninsula area will not, the infrastructure will not support them unless we proceed with replacing them. So in order to grow, we need to continue to invest in infrastructure. And right now we're investing the minimal amount we can in infrastructure. But we're trying to get ahead by leveraging and making $3 out of every dollar.
So I guess my, last night at finance, I said, with all the financial plan work that the finance committee has done, what's the next one going to do? I guess part of my ask would be, some of the similar rigor, now that we're finished with that phase of building clean, safe drinking water, I think now we need some rigor around the financial plan and future for St. John Water. My hope, and I know this is being investigated on the other side, is that we transition to meters and follow that up. But I think that is an important next step. I mean, I'm happy to take zero for this coming year. I think it is very much a good news story. The question, and because all sorts of things changed. We're finished clean, safe drinking water, and then the whole sewage, potable water switch. So I don't understand all the math. My hopeful is, geez, I wonder if there was some savings in that. I certainly understand, though, the balance between maybe there was some operational savings that could have been given back. Meanwhile, we're paying back debt that we have to pay interest on, and we've got the infrastructure deficit. So I'll take the win for tonight at zero, but I would hope that next year, when you come back with a budget, it's with a long-term financial plan for St. John Water.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Reardon, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'll just say a few things, Brent. You've heard it before. I would like to see us be able to, and the legislation doesn't allow it, for us to charge a flat rate for water for all of our vacant lots or dilapidated buildings on the lots. It's not about use. That's already been determined. It doesn't matter if I use no water or if I use all kinds of water. I pay a flat rate, so it's not about use. So I'd like to see that changed. That's with the Municipalities Act or legislation. We can't change that here. I'd have it changed, but that's not going to work. It's going to cost us $48.7 million to supply water, and that's what we'll get back because we can't charge for water. So I guess what I would ask about that, with all of your infrastructure debt, you've got all your raw and potable separated, and it's separated as much as it's going to be separated, then it's all organized. So I guess some things to think about, not tonight, is what's our responsibility for providing water, for one thing, to a community? Do we even have to provide raw water? And all infrastructure is a liability, as you just said. It gets old. Some of it's 150 years old, and some of it's not as old. But it's a liability. Is it better just turn the tap off and say someone else has to take that over, whoever wants it? The other thing, when I read through this with the raw water, it goes in to industry, and then it branches off. It may go to 2 other routes. I don't know if that's all our infrastructure it's traveling on, or if it's part, like when I look at Irving Oil, the last one, is that all our infrastructure?
Through your worship, no, there'd be some assets that are shared, and the
Okay.
way the cost allocation is done is based on a volumetric basis. So if the industry uses more, they pay more, but it's all for assets that are shared. It's costs are allocated on a volume basis.
And in your little Schedule B there, it has all of the meter sizes, starting with 15 millimeters, going up to 250, and then at 250, there is no more increase. And some of these meters are up to 1,800 millimeters, 1,500 millimeters. But then below it, it says metered customers, consumption, and then it's got a rate per cubic meter. So it sort of sounds like you could sell it by the, and then the rate decreases for the first 50 of consumption, 50 cubic meters, and then it decreases the rate. So how does that work in if you can't charge for water?
This is,
It's all raw, isn't it? Oh, no, it's all metered, sorry. It says metered customers on Schedule B. Consumption in cubic meters. First 50, 1.9944. For all excess of 125,000, 1.277. So it's 1.2, it's almost cut in half. Metered customers.
Your worship, yeah, this is what's referred to as a declining block rate structure, which is common in cities like St. John, where as you go through the first 50 cubic meters, the rate would drop. And so this aligns with what customers would have experienced historically, and the only thing that has changed is that the rate has changed, but commensurately on the wastewater side, the rate has lowered an equivalent amount essentially, so that the net cost to a customer who's a water and sewer customer is net increase is zero.
Right, and all I'll say is I guess I find it somewhat confusing to a certain extent, so I'm sure the public does, and maybe I'm the only one that is confused, but if we're only charging for the infrastructure to get your water there, but then you have a declining rate based on volume, it doesn't seem like volume's part of our equation because we only charge for infrastructure, but here volume is part of the equation. So I find it somewhat confusing. I find the whole thing somewhat confusing because it's a complicated subject, and I appreciate all the work that you've done on it, and it's coming together. It's coming together, and I appreciate the no increase in 2020. I know we had to practically beg you for that, but we do appreciate it. Anyways, thanks for everything, Brent, and I'll end it at that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. All good questions. Councillor Sullivan said at our Finance Committee meeting, I think, again, tongue-in-cheek a bit, what will the Finance Committee do in the new year? Well, you may have just discovered. It may continue to study and ask great questions. So thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly echoing Councillor Reardon's point of thanks, Brent, for explaining a pretty complicated matter to a lot of, I know I'm a layman on this stuff for sure. I just have a quick question. Certainly excited to see zeros as everyone is around the table. The industrial raw water rates, why do they differ based on location, like East Industrial Irving Oil, 26 cents, but Irving Paper is only 4 cents. Same goes for West with Irving Pulp and Paper and MB Power.
So, through your worship, so essentially what is done simplistically is that we look at all the costs to service that customer. So everything from operating costs to renewal of asset over the asset life to rate stabilization, contribution, all those sorts of things. We look at all that cost, add it together, and then divide it by the volume of water used by that customer so that we can collect the full revenue back from the customer throughout that year. And so when you look at the rates, they vary because the volume of water varies greatly from customer to customer, and the costs can also vary from customer to customer. So it's really about ensuring that you get back the revenue to cover the costs that you put out during the year to service that one individual customer.
Okay. And I guess why isn't it flat rated like potable water and where raw is subjective?
Yeah, so there are costs that are linked to use. So take, for example, our West customers, either Irving Pulp and Paper or NB Power Coulson Cove. So we have to buy water from the province of New Brunswick, from the Musquash watershed. We also have to pump it at a cost. And so as they use more water through the run of a year, their cost will go up. If they use less, their cost goes down.
Okay. And the new is the loss of Irving from potable water revenue seen in these numbers here? They're switched to raw?
They're switched to raw, so it's built into the budget, and all their costs are tracked separately, as well as potable water customers' costs are tracked separately, so that at all times, industry will pay their full share, and that there's no cross-subsidization happening between potable water customers and industry, and each customer will be tracked separately.
And can you just remind me, what was the loss in having Irving leave potable water into raw on their costs? What was the line item in which they paid in potable water? I know it was discussed in our last open session. I can't remember offhand.
I can't remember offhand either.
Okay.
Those numbers, yeah.
I guess I really just come back to my same question of before. I know it only serves as a fraction of. I mean, if you look at the decrease in revenue of potable water, I know it likely only serves as a fraction of that. But I guess my question remains is as we forecast and look at the likelihood of increasing rates, even though we get to celebrate at zero this time around. I can't help but think that losing a significant customer like that losing that revenue from there, and the added revenue without the necessary loss in infrastructure for that ends up costing potable water customers more in the long run, because we're losing a significant client more than just, if it's 395 houses, we're losing a significant customer there. I find it hard to believe, and I know we discussed it last time, that in the long run it's not actually costing potable water customers anymore.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to address that, Your Worship. So when you think of it, and if you step back out to our Loch Lomond watershed, where we have a number of dams, and then you think about the water moving through the watershed and through dams and through an intake pipe and a screening device and those sorts of things, all those assets are still shared with industry, and all those costs are still shared with industry on a volumetric basis. What is different is that they're not paying for other assets, water storage tanks and those sorts of things, which they don't use. So it's really about aligning the costs with the user and having everyone pay their full share, which is what the rate studies have done.
Right, okay. And I guess it still leaves my concern that when, they're no longer paying for the water storage facilities and all of the costs that potable water customers are faced with, that it ends up putting a bigger cost burden on fewer customers, which I think is what we're going to end up facing over the next few years. I'll leave my concern at that, but it is a significant concern of mine moving forward that the loss of their loss in revenue here leaves a bigger cost share for fewer payers. But I'll leave it at that. And certainly, thanks for your comments, Brent, and thanks for all your work on this, and team. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Merrithew.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, Brent, the way I understand Councillor Hickey's question is this way, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, is that we've got a cost recovery system. We cannot make a profit on it. It doesn't matter whether it's potable customer, you and I, or industry. So when we see the different rates, all we've taken is one portion of industry, and we've calculated exactly what we think it costs to deliver water, and we've charged them that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and so and we've asked this in finance to you, and your question has come back just what I've said is that we don't have the ability to go in, whatever entity it is, okay, to charge them more than they've actually used. One, we can't be profitable, and two, we can't have them pay for someone else's portion of the cost of water. Am I right there?
Yes, yeah. We can't profit off of it. It's really collecting enough revenue to cover our expenses.
Just what they use is what we're mandated, legislated to do.
That is a utility rate setting principle that's industry-wide across North America. That is a practice. So you recover costs based on your expenses.
I'm not trying to defend this. I'm trying to understand it. But in other communities, it has been, they've fought over this exact same thing. They said, look, we want to take this portion of water users and we want to charge them more than they've actually deemed to have used and are responsible for. And that hasn't worked, as I understand.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. And the experts we've worked with, Hempson, they're experts in this field. They set rates across the country, and they've not seen that practice anywhere in the country.
So I can't give the entire water bill to everyone on the end of the east side. We couldn't do it if we wanted to. And Ray and I don't want to.
Correct.
We could, but it's not standard practice.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Brent, I think you're going to have like a night class or UNBSJ is looking for water commissioners. Yeah. It's a complex topic, but obviously it's cost recovery and I do get that. One of the things I'm trying to understand is watersheds. And I know it's featured in the annual report, but anybody that looks at the annual report, I don't think anybody's got through the 950 pages. And every boil water notice is in that annual report. It's incredible. So with the watersheds, the costs are going up as it relates to maintenance with watersheds. Am I correct?
Yes, that would be property taxes, for example, of all the various lands, increase in labor associated with maintaining the watersheds. Exactly.
Okay. I'm going to go back. Councillor Sullivan will appreciate that. I feel a little bit like former Councillor Bill Farron here. I'm asking about watersheds. I always defended them, and I think I'm still defending them, but as it relates to the west side watersheds, the Spruce Lake one, that watershed is they're all large. It's large, but since we moved to a well system, is there any opportunity to? Is there any appetite or is there any exploration at reducing the footprint of the watershed? It's mostly used. I know it's a backup source if anything happens to the wells. Get that. It's a raw water supply right now for industry as well. Is it still necessary to have that large of a is the watershed determined based on formula, or is there an industry practice around there, or is it like the utility just says, look, we want as much land as we can because God isn't making more land, so this is a really valuable asset, so we're going to keep on purchasing it?
Yeah, through your worship. So the Spruce Lake watershed is, it's delineated by the province based upon contours and how the water flows. And so the city of St. John had acquired that land over many years, and it is indeed a backup drinking water supply. It's also, excuse me, an important resource for the future. You look ahead 100 years, 200 years, there's still going to be a lot of demand on water. And the ability to protect a watershed like that for the long term, when you look at some of the challenges that other communities in the country and in the world are dealing with, once it becomes contaminated, it's contaminated, and it's going to cost you a lot more down the road. But I would say that all the costs associated with the Spruce Lake watershed have now been shifted such that industry, our two west customers, will be covering 100% of those costs.
Okay, so you answered my next question because it kind of piggybacks on what Councillor Merrithew had just finished saying. So the cost to industry, the cost to maintain that particular watershed, which industry is using, the labor costs and the cost to maintain it are being borne by industry to a point, right?
Fully by industry now.
Okay.
Under this new rate structure, would be fully by
underneath
industry.
this new rate structure. Are we enlarging our watersheds, or is that kind of, we look at opportunities as they present you as the commissioner, and if they're beneficial, we'll acquire them, and if not, we leave them alone, or are we actively pursuing expanding our footprint?
We regularly look at that. Either real estate will bring opportunities forward to St. John Water, or individuals will approach St. John Water, given the restrictions that come with owning land that is within a watershed. It becomes quite restrictive, and therefore, they know who likes to acquire it.
Okay. So with that, is there revenue potential with watershed lands if it was a right fit and the purchaser met those stringent requirements?
Provided it, maybe hard to describe this without a map, but when you look at a parcel, some are long and narrow, and part of the parcel will fall within the watershed boundary, and a portion of it will fall outside the watershed boundary.
Certainly.
Those parcels, we do look for opportunities. In fact, we're having discussions now, maybe before council in the new year, looking to sever off a piece and subdivide it and sell it for revenue for the utility.
Great to hear. That's in the, I can't believe I'm going to say this word, great to hear that's in the hopper, so there we go. Thanks.
Or basket, bucket, vessel, would you say, vessel? Perfect, thank you, Councillor. Pat. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Richard. So the infrastructure that's supplying industry raw water and a backup system for public, that's totally financed by industry now, the costs.
Yeah, this, not right now it isn't. Under this new rate structure that's before council for consideration this evening, it would allocate all those costs to industry.
Okay. Bear with me on this one. When we started talking about building a new water plant, right? There was different sizes factored into the number of users, right? Did we land on the one that we've got built out there now based on the consumption of industry that has since changed its mind to consume potable water and go with raw water?
Yes, that's exactly the case. So we actually, when the city looked at planning for a water treatment facility, they looked at ensuring that industry would come off the system, that industry wouldn't be a consideration in the future to be served with potable water, knowing that it would have increased the footprint of the water treatment facility, and maybe I didn't understand your question
No,
fully.
I think you're getting there.
The water treatment facility was sized such that all industry would be serviced with industrial water. With industrial raw water and not potable water, because otherwise it would have increased the footprint and the cost for users. So the plan has always been to serve all industry with raw water, and as part of the Safe Clean Drinking Water project, the plan was to separate the customers, in particular Irving Oil, from the system such that they would be receiving industrial raw water and not treated water.
Okay, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that was thinking at one point in time here that maybe the household user now is subsidizing because industry opted out, but they were supposed to opt out.
That's exactly correct. They were never to be part of the potable water treated system.
Thanks for the clarification.
Whew, okay, thank you very much. Oops, sorry, Mr. McGovern, I'll turn your microphone back on. Okay, thanks. Just a couple of comments for me. I'll try to zip through them real quick. I think to Councillor Norton's comment, I mean, this I think it's complex. I also wrote down continued education and engagement around, why don't we make a profit, how much revenue versus expense. So I think continuing to have this dialogue and making it as simple as we can for folks to understand. I think that I won't get into great detail about it, but when I look at the debt that you're retiring and so on, I would just caution us. I understand the rate sensitivity. I'm also concerned about it. It goes to our overall competitiveness, but I also think we could fall right back into the exact same approach that we've had around these tables over the years. So in a way, I'd say, well, what do we want the rate to be? Slow the debt repayment down, slow down infrastructure renewal. So there's many ways. I'm not saying we shouldn't have that discussion. Right now, you're paying down debt pretty aggressively, and we're concerned about debt. So it's all interconnected. So as we go into the new year, we can certainly have that discussion. I apologize for maybe not being as aware of the number of folks that we've lost off the system. I mean, obviously that's quite concerning, and it makes, Ms. Hamilton's left the room for a moment, but it makes our growth focus so critically important, in particular around areas that were dense, that we already have the infrastructure. Do we have any flexibility, in an area where the infrastructure already exists, where we lost a home, to say, if you build a new home on that lot, we'll give you free water for 1 year?
Yeah, that's a question that we'd have to take away and look at. I don't know if city solicitor wants to chime in.
We can follow up with it, but so how do we recover? So what are those, for future discussions, what are those incentives, but with very focused in a place where a house was burnt down, we infill on it? Are there some incentives? Because right now I'd say it's a lost, unless the demand increases and you're going to get a new build. We'll come back to that in future meetings. Yeah, prudent fiscal management, I think, is critically important. My understanding, the last piece, I'll be direct in what I'm about to say, and it's my finishing comment. Certainly, I think our discussion around industrial rate users, that has caused some discussion in the community on why certain industrial users are paying. Folks. Anyway, on why certain industrial users might be paying less. Here's my take, and I see if I've got it close. We hired an independent in Hempson. Sorry, folks, can we just, we hired an independent contractor or consultant with expertise in Hempson. They independently studied rates. They did that with a national lens and their expertise. The recommendation before us tonight is recognizing no longer drinking water that I'm going to drink in my apartment tonight, or I did in my house a month ago, raw water for their industrial use, and we've got full cost recovery in that. that we're now transformational, another historic night, I think, folks. We're no longer going to negotiate those deals, however they were negotiated in the past. We're going to have that in a bylaw, openly and transparently set at council. And if there's more cost in the future, we can come back and we can change that bylaw to increase the costs. Okay? And lastly, for me, and look, I've been just had a few questions on this. Council has been advocating for fairness. It's embedded in our policies, taxation fairness. And to me, the way I rationalize this in my mind is all the data has said, this is what we charge. And as Councillor Merrithew said, in the current approach, we can't make a profit. That's full cost recovery. And that's fair, and it's this group isn't subsidizing this group, and that's fair. And I think it's important for us to demonstrate that, even if it's a little bit controversial for some folks don't like it. It's important for us to demonstrate fairness when tomorrow we turn around and we advocate for tax fairness and for the data to drive that certain individuals should pay their fair share of tax. So from this individual's perspective, if we're going to act with integrity and we want fairness and the data says this is what you should charge, that's what we should do. If the legislation's changed down the road and we can be in the for-profit water business, that's a whole separate conversation. So did I capture that? I'm not asking you to comment on my comment around fairness, but the elements on how we arrived here, Mr. McGovern, did I somewhat capture that?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, folks. So the recommendation was moved, and sorry, Councillor Reardon, I completely support you on the vacant lots and the dilapidated buildings. We should, and City Manager, perhaps the councillor would like to bring a motion back in the new year to have that added to our reform legislation. I think this government would probably be quite, why not? I mean, it goes to us being more fiscally sustainable. So maybe in the new year, Councillor. Okay, thank you. The motion is on the floor, the recommendation. So I'll, on first reading, is that, no. First, this recommendation, excuse me. Okay, thank you. The recommendation's on the floor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Anyone contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Moved first reading, second by Councillor Merrithew. Thank you. I'll call that. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Do you have to? Sorry. There you go, sir.
This one's a bylaw to amend a bylaw respecting water and sewerage.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy, and seconded by Councillor Sullivan. Thank you. On the question, I'll call that. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Mr. McGovern, for your work tonight. Okay, next item.
A bylaw to amend a bylaw respecting water and sewerage.
I apologize. Okay, next item, please.
1.3.1, Winter Street Maintenance.
Okay, thank you. City Manager.
Your Worship, members of council, my introductory comments will apply to the first three agenda items under 1.3. These are additional sustainability initiatives for your comment to us as staff to better inform us and also to make a decision as to whether these, and I will use the expression, are suitable for going into the hopper or not. I will have additional introductory comments when we address 1.3.4. I would introduce this evening, as always, Ms. Stephanie Rackley-Roach, who is leading the team working through these various initiatives.
Okay, thank you. And a microphone, Ms. Rackley-Roach. Nice to see you again. We always love seeing you. Good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. The first item is the winter street maintenance. The city does have a winter maintenance plan that outlines service level standards and associated resources for winter street maintenance. Plowing and salting and sanding operations relies heavily on heavy equipment availability, both city-owned and some leased where it makes financial sense. This sustainability idea looks at how to better utilize equipment to achieve cost savings. Based on a high-level analysis of equipment assignments on the 41 plow routes outlined in the winter management plan, it has been determined that the current fleet could be reduced by up to 12 pieces of equipment. This can be achieved by eliminating equipment from the fleet that only has plowing capabilities and better distributing equipment with dual capabilities. This approach creates efficiencies by assigning only one piece of equipment to a route that can both plow and salt and sand. Reducing the proposed redistribution of equipment would require a balancing of employees assigned to both the day shift and the night shift. The proposed new model would result in a decrease in service during peak demands such as periods of heavy snowfall and/or heavy traffic. The proposed model will provide, though, an improved service response on priority 2, 3, and 4 streets overnight, ensuring citizens have better access to main arterials throughout the city, especially during their early morning commutes. The proposed equipment reduction may have an impact on service response in the event equipment breaks down during storm events with limited spare equipment. There may also be an impact on some summer operations as this equipment is repurposed for activities such as asphalt maintenance. Savings from the implementation of this proposed sustainability idea are estimated at $347,000. This figure is inclusive of equipment and fuel reductions, elimination of contracted routes, and a decrease in overtime resulting from our current process of a calling-in process for crews at 3 a.m. to increase service response for early morning commuters during storm events. It is recommended that Common Council endorse the proposed Winter Street maintenance sustainability item as an option to be considered in addressing the entirety of the deficit in 2021 and 2022. And Commissioner Hugenholtz and his team are in attendance this evening to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Moved by Councillor Reardon, seconded by Councillor Hickey. Thank you. And Deputy, first up.
Well, could someone just explain if we can reduce our equipment and save money, how come we haven't been doing it? I mean, why are we just starting? You know, so, I mean, what's going to change? Are some routes going to be taken off? Or I understand now, that you're talking about a day shift and a night shift. But quite a few years ago, the city had a day shift and a night shift, and then they changed it. And I don't know exactly what you changed it to, because I don't know all the details. So I just need someone to explain to me why all of a sudden we think we can save money.
Through you, Your Worship.
Oh, excuse me, Commissioner. Sorry, let me get your microphone.
Through you, Your Worship, there's at least a couple significant drawbacks that council should be aware of. In rebalancing the equipment, or actually eliminating equipment, it does certainly reduce our peak response capability for winter storms. And that peak response will be noticed a couple ways. During times of heavy snowfall or weather-driven events, we will have less trucks out on the road at any one time. And secondly, it does have an impact as well on our summer service and our ability to complete projects during the construction season.
Is there any other drawbacks? Just so we know, we should know, is there any other drawbacks on the wintertime? And when you say it will have impact on summer projects, in what way? What are we eliminating? Or, I mean, we're going to have less equipment, people are going to work day and night or different shifts, but can you give us any idea if there's any other downside to this? I realize that if this is put in the hopper, we'll talk about all the ups and downs of it at a later time.
Through you, Your Worship, it'll reduce our summer capacity, so that could be manifest in a few different ways. It could be a longer response time to citizen work requests. It could be just less patching. Probably the areas where we would see that impact most is in asphalt street maintenance and in stormwater related tasks. For example, everything from ditching to culvert maintenance, catch basin repairs and cleaning, etc.
Well, thank you. And if we put this, I'm not going to say that again, but if we put this off to discuss it in February or March, whenever, we'll have the opportunity to talk about this more on just how it will impact the community. I just, if we're saving money and we know we can do it in the future, I just have to question, well, why didn't we do this?
City Manager, you want to jump in there?
Your worship
Oh,
to,
no, sorry, I don't have you, just to hit your button for me. There you go, sorry.
Your worship to the deputy mayor. This, in our view, is not simply a continuous improvement initiative, just do it, because there is an impact. To be clear, right now, we do have a day shift and a night shift now. The night shift is minimal or very small in comparison to the day shift. That decision was made some time ago, and as the commissioner has mentioned, that was to ensure that when we have a major snowstorm, we have a surge capability that can go out there and deal as quickly as possible with the major snowstorm. By going to this approach, where the two shifts are more balanced, we can use less equipment, or we need less equipment, but we do not have as robust a surge capability anymore because we don't have the equipment anymore. That's the impact. We can certainly talk about the impact more the next time this comes up, but we will not be able to define it any better than we already have. It depends on the snowstorms, the size, the severity of them, et cetera, et cetera. Our surge capability will be diminished. We still believe that we will satisfy all of the service levels set out in our winter storm management plan of priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, priority 4 roads, and by when they need to be serviced. We will still satisfy that even with this proposal. But I really don't see us being able to come back 2 months from now with any more precision as to, it means that the priority 1 roads will be delayed by 2 hours in plowing. It depends on the snow or the ice rain or the combination thereof.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. And Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do like that we're going to be focusing more on trucks that could do more than one job. I like that in here. I also heard some complaints for yesterday's storm in the morning. So that might help with a bigger overnight shift. I'm kind of assuming that also we were hoping it would probably turn to rain and we wouldn't have to send trucks out at all. But I'm not sure about the drawbacks, so I'm okay with leaving this so I can mull it over a little bit more. So I'd like to keep it on the list. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do so many great things in the city. How we couldn't come up with a better term than hopper, I don't know. I think we just should, I'm going to call it the list, Collins List. I really like the heat maps at the bottom of these. I think that's a really tremendous asset, and I hope that councilors are using it in, it's usually Appendix 1 of all of these items. It's a really good understanding of really how things are impacted here. I just, perhaps a question for the city manager. I'm just wondering, is council's vote, like the way in which council voted based on, for and against, does that take any consideration once it gets placed on the list as to where it's placed?
Thank you for that question, Councillor, because I think it's an important point to make. We are taking notes on all of council's observations. So when we eventually come back in the March timeframe and say, these are a couple of different options to address the entirety of the deficit, we will have taken into account in our deliberations all of your observations. And let's face it, we wouldn't be doing our job as staff if we tried to push forward something where we saw that the support for it was lukewarm at best. Mm-hmm. So I personally, as your city manager, although I know this is a frustrating exercise to go through, one item at a time, providing feedback on each of them, I will tell you that the feedback is useful to us because it's going to inform our analysis for our development of options that we need to come back to you on in the March timeframe.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It certainly gives good scope. No, I appreciate that. That's everything for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, everyone, for the report. A couple things that just twigged my mind very quickly. I think Councillor Casey made a great point around expectation. And I think that city manager, you and your team, and with our input, needs to more proactively discuss, manage, work on, because again, my experience from my past life is if it's not managed, it manages you. And so were we waiting for rain yesterday, or was it just our normal plan? Or, you know, I want my road, I mean, I know you've done, Mr. Hugenholtz, Commissioner, I know you've got priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. I just think it needs to be a much more active focus, and especially as we go through some restraint and we go through change. And so I just want to register, please, the whole aspect of managing expectation, because yesterday I got praise for the work that your teams did, passed along, and I got complaints. What's the difference? It could be, you know, you could have done the exact same thing. So I would actively manage that. I plan on adopting a portion of the sidewalk in front of my new apartment this winter, just mostly because I have pent up energy, and I have a shovel left over from my house. But, you know, again, I don't know if that's on the list anywhere. I know folks have suggested it to me many times. I would be pleased to adopt my my elderly neighbor's 10 feet if that's what it needed. I'll buy a bag of, so I don't know if that's in the consideration list anywhere. I know other municipalities do it, but I just leave that comment with you. And my last comment is, when we say things like, why don't we insert, you know, blank, why don't we just do this, why don't we just do that? If there's a restriction from keeping us from driving maximum value for taxpayers and efficiency, I want the restriction removed. I want to know that we're working on it. I want to know that we maybe can't do it that way today, but in 2 years or 3 years, we're going to be able to do it that way. I just leave that, and I think I'm not trying to speak in code. I could be way more direct if you'd like, but the barriers we had up earlier, that like we need to have the flexibility to do this as efficiently as possible. So, okay, thank you. Those are my comments. Deputy Mayor?
Well, just a little one. I didn't, are you going to sell this equipment that we're not going to use? I'm concerned about this one, because we can say, if we're not going to get too much more information about it, I'm not sure whether I could go along with this, because I have my own theory about some of the things we do in plowing. Like, I'd like to see us start earlier when a storm happens and not wait. I don't know all the rules that we do now, but I mean, and sometimes when we sell equipment, we don't get a lot of money for it. We practically give it away. I know you go to auctions or whatever, maybe that's just to buy it, I don't know. But I'm concerned about some of this, because I don't want to say I'm going to be in favor of something that down the road I'm going to be sorry I voted for it, because I didn't have all the information. So when we talk about service for winter storms, it's very important that we're out there, because if not, the city can't operate. Not us, the city, but the whole city, because people can't get their vehicles to go through snow. So it's great to take the bus and all that, but they're normally canceled when we have big storms. But I mean, the thing is, the city has to work. Businesses have to run. So I just, unless, you know, I don't know if there's anything else you can give me for any assurance of what this is going to do. That's all. I'm a little bit confused.
So, City Manager, I had a couple of, Commissioner, did you want to jump back in there?
Just briefly, through you, Your Worship, yes, that would be the intent, that if this ultimately did get approved, all that surplus equipment identified would be sent to auction. Those proceeds would go back into the Fleet Reserve Fund. They could plug part of the deficit that currently exists, or in future we could look at using some of that money to make our equipment more multi-purpose between the two seasons.
City Manager, are you okay, or would you like to jump in there?
To answer the second part of the Deputy Mayor's question about assurances, our belief is that we will still satisfy the service levels that are articulated within the winter storm management plan in terms of priority 1, priority 2, 3, and 4. In fact, I would suggest to you that in some cases, people are going to see service earlier, because the night shift will be regularly larger than it currently is. It is only in those very rare occasions of the very large storms where on occasion we will make a decision to call in additional people to have a surge capability, and we throw them onto the extra trucks. We will no longer be able to do that. But we will still satisfy the requirement, in accordance with our service levels, to clear the various priority roads within the timeframes that we have said we would do so.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go to Councillor Norton, just ahead of you, Councillor Casey. He just hasn't spoken yet. So
Yeah, no,
Councillor
thank you, Your
Norton.
Worship. I'm completely in support of this. This is great. I think it balances both lines, that night and that day shift. I think it gives us a better chance in terms of when weather events hit, being able to provide a more adequate service. It keeps us, the city manager's already said, it keeps us within our winter management storm guidelines and the response times. I think this is just a good move all the way around. More flexible equipment. I see a lot of upsides as it relates to this one. This is just efficiency, and I don't think residents are going to see any downside from this one at all. The previous version of this was saying that weather events are all going to hit within this 12-hour time frame, and we know that that's not the case. They can hit during a different time, and we were ill-equipped to respond. So I think by having two strong lineups out there, I think it's all hats off to the commissioner and the rest of the team for doing a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question. Do we have flexibility to, like, if say the morning shift, there's not much going on, do we have, and the snowstorm's going to happen later at night, do we have flexibility to, like, send people home and say, come back without paying overtime or anything?
Who wants to answer that one? Okay, Commissioner Huguenot, you're back on.
The answer is no. We essentially we change twice a year to a different shift schedule. That shift schedule we set to basically optimize our response to whatever the season is that we're going into. So construction season, we pare down the night shift quite a bit because it's hard to do construction at night. It's dark, nothing's open, you can't get materials. But in the winter shift now, we do have most of the materials we need to keep on working. So we've done a number of analyses over the years to look at with X number of resources. What's the best way to spread those between day, between night, with gap times? And the intent is really to maximize the service to citizens and to minimize the cost. So we've done that for this season. We've just moved to our winter shift schedule, but we don't have flexibility. I'm not aware of any municipalities anywhere that have absolute flexibility to only call in people whenever they're needed.
All right, thanks. I was just curious, to be honest. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'll give you this one, Deputy. You told me.
Well, okay. So if you think this is going to be good, can we start it in 2020? I mean, not the equipment downsizing, but the shifts. No? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I talked about expectations, the bylaw. It's not important, obviously, it went out of my head. Okay, that's fine. So the recommendation's on the floor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. And folks, we have a lot left. Sorry, I know what it was. City Manager, these are difficult sort of debates as we go through, and perhaps something for you to consider, because I'm not sure how we're going to keep sort of tracking. We may need a barometer on the wall here, because they're like the option of do nothing isn't an option. So like we put some in and we our barometer goes up, and then we want to take one out, the barometer goes back down. So somehow here over the next weeks and months ahead, we're going to have to keep track of how we're tracking on our goals, or we're going to be several months to.
Your Worship, members of council, 2 points. First of all, yes, we are developing a barometer or thermometer, or whatever we want to call it, for our website that will show our progress, our indicative process. And the other point for those who are concerned about this evening, we did commit to this being a 3-hour session, terminate at 7:30. Okay. All of these items, if we can keep going till 7:30, at 7:30, I would suggest that we could table the rest to our next council meeting.
Okay, thank you. Next item, please.
Your worship, 1.32, reduction in economic development investment.
Ms. Rackley Roach. Oh, sorry, podium. Off you go.
In 2019, the City of St. John invested a total of $2,329,000 and change into the city's 3 economic development agencies, inclusive of Develop St. John, Economic Development Greater St. John, and Discover St. John. This sustainability idea contemplates a 10% reduction in the city's overall investment into the 3 economic development agencies, or a reduction of approximately $233,000. For the fiscal years of 2021 and 2022. At this time, staff have not completed an assessment of how that 10% reduction would be applied across the 3 agencies. While the agencies would be required to determine how their services would be impacted, this reduction may have a minor impact on the city's ability to achieve tax-based employment and growth targets for St. John in the short term. It is recommended that Common Council endorse the proposed reduction in economic development investment as an option to be considered in addressing the entirety of the deficit in 2021 and 2022. And Commissioner Hamilton is in attendance to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. It's moved and seconded. Councillor Reardon.
I'm not supporting it. In my council kit, tourism has already gone from, in the first budget item we did, from 1.03 million to 528,000. Now, they're going to balance that off with the 1.4 in the levy, but the intention of the levy is to be added to tourism, so I don't agree with that at all. I don't think we should take that money away. And you've already gotten rid of this will be the last year, 2020, for the grant, or what do we spend, 350 to the growth
Reserve.
the growth reserve. This 2020 will be the last year for that. You've already got your urban development incentives in the hopper. You've got your heritage grants in the hopper. And you already know that for every dollar the city spends on a heritage grant, the owner is putting in $4. We've got that data already, at least $4. So a lot of your growth initiatives are already in that hopper. I think it would be a mistake to throw those ones in. So I'm voting against it.
Okay, thank you. Can I just build I just want to make sure I'm clear, and I'm not sure I am, in terms of just as on a budget item before we continue this debate around the tourism investment and then the levy and how that's being handled. I thought, and perhaps I'm wrong, that those were net dollars. Am I mistaken? And who's going to answer? City manager? Or you?
Your worship, the approach we have taken with the accommodation levy, because we are in austere times, obviously, is that the commitment we've made to the community as a whole is that the approach we would seek support from council on through our budgeting process is that the amount of dollars that would go towards tourism would not be reduced by imposing the accommodation levy. So with the accommodation levy yielding, we anticipate approximately $1.5 million for the total contribution to tourism to not be reduced. That means the city must continue to contribute, first of all, and in order to have the same figures as past years, the city needs to contribute approximately $500,000. That's the very rough math. To Councillor Reardon's point, that maintains what we are currently funding. If there is a desire of council to fund more to tourism, then that would be a budgetary pressure that is currently not factored in for the year 2020.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to keep this on the list mainly because it says economic development, and I would consider urban development, which is on the list already, and the Growth Reserve Fund, which is also kind of an economic development fund. And you could even put in the Heritage Grant, which is also an economic development fund. I'm just wondering why we need all these funds separately. Can somebody just look after economic development in general?
Okay, do you want to go to, do you want to do that, or the commissioner, or city manager?
Two observations, Your Worship, to the councillor. First of all, we are going through an economic development realignment exercise. We are trying to pursue a regional model. If that doesn't work, we'll pursue another model. So some of the suggestions you're offering will be subjects of discussion within that realignment exercise. What this particular sustainability initiative is, I'll use a metaphor, is this is taking a haircut. Everybody has to contribute a share towards reduction. So what we are saying is between Discover, Edge, and Develop SJ, their total budgets, this has nothing to do with reserve funds or other allocations, their total budget takes a haircut, like everybody else is taking a haircut, and this idea is that they take a haircut of 10%. Yes, it is another reduction to our overall growth agenda. There is no denying that.
So basically what I'm saying, I want to keep this on the list because just so I want to have the option of which economic development area I want to take the money from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Well, I seconded this motion because I feel quite strongly that since we have to reduce, we got to reduce everybody to some degree. You can't just pick and choose. I don't think that's right. Economic development is very important to the city. And the other thing I'd want to say is that we're asked to do this, and I thought when we were doing this, and at first we were told they're going in a hopper, whatever a hopper is, I thought it was that 3 or 4 months from now, we would be back here with all the details of each item, and we discuss it fully to know what we were doing. Because in economic development, we're being asked to have a discussion, but we're trying to join all these agencies together. I'm not so sure, or I'm not sold at the moment that that's going to save money, but I think it might even cost us more money. The other thing we have to consider is that when we reduce our cost, the other regions, if they buy into going into one economic development agency, their costs will go down. So there's a lot of issues that's going to be around this because we're not near having the other regions sign on yet to take on all of this. They don't go in to Discover St. John or develop St. John as it is. They only pay into economic development, Greater St. John. So having said all that, I can agree to keep it in the hopper as long as when it comes time, we have the opportunity to discuss it more fully with more information from staff.
Okay.
Because it's very difficult to just make a decision on these things tonight when they're major issues, and we don't have all the details. You're asking us to put them there. Fine, I'll put it over there. But at the time, I'm not going to vote to reduce if I don't know what how the effect's going to be.
Right.
So, I mean, if the city manager wants to talk about that, that's fine. But I think that all of us have to know the details.
Okay.
I'm not against talking about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Hickey.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one's a no-go for me. I think with the amount of momentum that we're seeing in economic development, we just had the presentation on the Funday Quayside earlier this week. I really think it's a tough one for me to clip the wings of our economic development agencies at this point. And I understand that this is an important exercise and we need to make sure that we have everything on the table. But I think when we're picking what's going in onto the list, for me it's not necessarily about fairness. It's more about equity, and I think that's really what's resounding for me on this one, and that's certainly, given the momentum of it, this one remains as a no, or it remains off the list for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess, when I look at what our priority is to grow this city, right? I think that, we have to be careful. And this goes back to the, giving back the $2.8 million. Yeah, the $2.8 million. I mean, this is something here that, to David's point, has actually helped us grow the uptown area and the city at large, really. And we talked about Develop SJ the other night and Fundy Key. So this is one of those ones that I find really difficult because I think it's going to impact our growth big time. I think we should actually not put it in the hopper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just because staff is listening in on the support, and I think this one will end up with soft support if it has it, but we're currently going through an exercise where we're looking at bringing the economic agencies together. In my mind, this gives a bit of a target as you move forward. One thing I haven't seen an economic agency do in my 7+ years around here is come in and say, we're willing to do the same with less. So I think it gives them a target to deal with as well. And I'm liking the buzzword, so I'll put the haircut in the hopper. It really, we haven't treated everyone equally. We've made some very specific, the other night, I think we made a very good decision, and I think council was united and emphasized, you know, when we're looking at all those grants, the neighborhood sustainability grants are off the table for this council. So we have picked and chosen, and we said lifeguards, it's a no-go. So we have looked at things and said, you know, those ones, we don't want them to go forward onto the list because we think they are very, very important key foundational items for the city. For me, economic development, yes, it is important. But I think a 10% reduction in a time where it's also being reorganized helps give that target. And just in response to the comment that, you know, we need more information, with respect, I don't think I've seen anything come before us that hasn't been talked about in the 7 years that I've been here. And I know there are few who haven't been here that long, but most of us have been. And I'm sure we've talked about, at some point in time, winter snow. We've talked about economic development agencies. These discussions have been had. These aren't new, other than they're packaged, and we really are focusing on getting the package together now. So I think, for me, for this councillor, I think a 10% reduction while it's reorganizing, I think is a fine target.
Thank you. Councillor Norton.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Same, I guess, same thought. I don't think that this puts a gun at the head of our economic development agencies whatsoever. This is a modest target, keeping in mind that economic development's a shared responsibility between all three levels of government, between the federal, the provincial, and the municipality. Keeping in mind that we've got many stakeholders in economic development, whether that's health, whether that's education, etc. And I think, especially when we're looking to reorganize, that this isn't going to upset the apple cart at all. There's this one for me. At least from a citizen standpoint, if we're going to be reducing frontline services, folks, that impact exactly what happens at the curb, then by all means, this is something I'm going to reduce as well, in all fair standing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of comments, and we'll close this one off. Maybe the last one of the night. So I've been tested many times in this role as mayor, especially from a values perspective, integrity, do what's right, no matter what. Been tested many, many times. So I'll register my comments. I mean, growth has been something I've talked about on the campaign trail, something I've been fixated on. I'm very concerned also. I would have concern about the momentum that we do have, not taking that for granted, not slowing that up. So I'd be concerned about that. I think the growth, even though we just had a banner year in assessment-based growth, it's half of the assessment-based growth, you know, certainly than Moncton or maybe even Fredericton, but lagging way behind in the region. And we know on the permitting side, for example, we're way behind. To give the $365 back, though, to give back the $365 in 2028, we need to accelerate those growth outcomes. So those are my concerns. We're certainly having budget deliberations. They're certainly not easy. And I want to make sure that we're dealing with our root and systemic issues, and I'm not accusing anyone of taking the easy ways out. So we've got to deal with those root issues. Like, this is a pillar for this council and this group. But here's where the integrity piece comes in. I don't get to vote very often. I would support it going to that next review to give those groups their chance to give their feedback, to give their concern, to say, here's the risk, that's the integrity piece. I can't say, city manager, do it in every other area. And even though this is like a baby to me, this is like a child, and that's the wrong analogy, but I care deeply about it. It is fundamentally what we must do. I think we have to ask those groups to say, how can we do it differently? We invest $2.3 million plus population growth. Our suburban partners invest $225 of our probably somewhere in the range of $2.5 to $3 million. Let's explore how we're going to achieve our objectives, but also see if we can do it a bit more efficiently. Those would be my comments. Okay, thank you. The recommendation, I think, though, is yes, it is on the floor, and I will call the question. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and those opposed? 1, 2. Okay, thank you. The motion is carried. Okay, City Manager, 7:23 at night.
Your worship, members of council, by all means, the staff is ready to continue, but we did suggest that this should be a 3-hour meeting tonight. There is nothing that is time sensitive with the remaining items. I leave it to council to decide whether they would wish them tabled or whether we continue this evening.
Call for a meeting adjourned.
Okay. Yeah, can we? Okay, so, yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah. Okay, so the motion is to table the remaining items, second by Councillor Hickey. Thank you. And then, okay,
No, we did.
Okay, I'll call, yeah, no problem. I guess that means folks want to go at by 7:30. Thanks. I'll call that on the tabling motion. I'll call that question, please. All those in favor? Okay, and anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. And a motion to adjourn. Got it. And a seconder. Thank you. And just very quickly. I know we want to go to our staff. Thank you. We had good debate tonight. We got a little longer. I know some of you sat here all night to wait for us to maybe have your item. We thank you for your preparation. We thank you for your patience tonight. Part of the process, I guess, but we know you're working incredibly hard on behalf of taxpayers. We thank you immensely for that. Okay, I'll call the question on adjournment. All those in favor? Anybody contrary-minded? Not seeing any. Thank you. Motion's carried.
Monday we're keeping it.